the special board meeting of the Park Ridge Park District Board of Park Commissioners, and today is Tuesday, November 12th. It is approximately 7:03. Can we all rise to say the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Marianne, could you please call the roll?
Sure. Commissioner Coyne? Here. Commissioner Grau? Here. Commissioner LeDuc? Here. Commissioner Leach?
Here.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Here.
Commissioner Tunnel?
Here.
Commissioner Harrington?
Here. Does anyone have anything they'd like to amend, add, or delete from our current agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Public comment on any non-agenda items. Let's see, we have any guests with us tonight. We will move on to the Attorney Services Request for Proposals section of the agenda, and I'm going to turn this over to Executive Director Mountcastle.
Thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to begin and kind of give a little background for the rest of the board. Just to refresh you, we had a task force, and that consisted of President Harrington, Commissioner Leach, Superintendent DeAngelis, myself, and Executive Administrative Assistant Lou Kars. We had RFPs that were sent out to on 9/12 to 11 firms. We had 6 firms that responded, and the task force interviewed 3 firms for interviews. Our current council, our current corporate council did not submit. So we evaluated on the criteria we outlined, and they responded to the RFP and interviews in the interview. And obviously we asked a very amount of other questions other than just what was in the RFP. It is our recommendation to hire Ansel Glank, PC, as the Park District's corporate legal counsel, effective January 1, 2020. And Dirk Price, who is here with us tonight, would serve as the primary legal counsel and would be primarily assisted by Scott Puma, Carrie Lynn Craftifer, and Jim Rock. A little background on the firm that Dirk may also go into, but they represent 54 park districts and SRAs, which are special recreation associations such as May Niles. I happened to check references of 5 of my colleagues, and the references were all excellent. At this time, I was going to turn it over to Dirk Price. He can introduce himself and give a short presentation and be open for questions to the rest of the board. Sure.
Again, I'm Dirk Price. I'm one of the owners of Ansel Glank. Thank you. I'm one of the owners of the firm. In fact, we've pledged to have nothing but the 3 of the equity partners working on your stuff. Carrie Lynn Craftifer, who's one of our labor lawyers, would assist with HR. But I would be your primary point of contact. We do represent 54 park districts across the state of Illinois, and a few more park and rec departments as well for some municipalities like Charleston. In terms of the number of such entities, we are a local government practice, and park districts are the highest number of that particular type of unit of local government that we represent. Municipalities are second. Our practice really changed in the mid-90s when Bob Rolek, who some of you might know, Bob Rolek was the executive director of the Lake Bluff Park District for some time. He retired, went to law school, became a lawyer, and started working for park districts in Northern Illinois, in part because he said he was always tired of his lawyer telling him no, that there was a way to say yes for these things. And Bob changed how he came to Ansel Glank. They folded him in. He became a named partner and an owner. Bob changed the way we practice law for park districts. That's our mission, is to find a way to say yes to your goals and policies. We don't set policy. We're here to help you find a way to execute what you want to do, and to some extent try and keep you out of trouble in finding a way to say yes. That's our mission, and that's how we've approached it, and we've grown the firm from an original 3 park districts to the 54 we have now. And while we have 54 park districts, we'd like to think that in terms of service, you'll feel you're our only park district and you're that important. And that's our challenge. In terms of customer service, it's our challenge to every single employee who works on your business that every phone call has to be returned within 24 hours, even if it's the weekend, but usually the same business day. I gave Gail a number of contacts to test us about that and ask. And from that perspective, in my career, and I've been doing this almost 30 years, biggest compliment is that Carrie Fullerton at the Bloomingdale Park District, she called and said, you haven't gotten something from me today, have you? And I said, no, why? She goes, yeah, we figured out we had an email problem at our end because you didn't call me back right away and tell me what the answer was to something I emailed out this morning. That's what I like to hear. That's what we promise to deliver in terms of customer service, and we could not be more honored and delighted to be considered to be your attorneys. And I'm happy to field any questions from you about how we practice law and how we intend to provide customer service. Because at the end of the day, while it's the legal profession, it's a customer service business. And that's what we're in the business of. Madam President?
Dirk, one of the things that we were able to talk with you about during the interview process was about potential conflicts with other local government entities that the firm represents. For the benefit of all of us, can you share a little bit more about how we would handle that, for instance, with city representation?
Sure. My partner, Julie Tappendorf, another one of the owners of the firm, is the primary attorney at Ansel Glink who works for the city of Park Ridge. We are in the same position in a number of communities across Illinois, including Glenview, which was one of the ones I asked Gail to talk to Mike McCarty at the Park District. The way we handle that is that the teams are separate. Although we're 35 lawyers and we all work collaboratively on the problems of our clients, when it comes to these situations where we have a couple of units of government in the same community, we separate the teams. So I don't ever work on the Village of Glenview's issues. I've not worked on any of the City of Park Ridge issues, and I wouldn't. I'm your attorney. And in the rare case, and it's only happened one time that we know of where 2 entities that we represented got into a fight. It was an insurance issue to begin with, so we were out on the one and we declined to represent the other because of the insurance issues. And that's what would happen if there was going to be some sort of fight between the Park District and the city. But it rarely happens because I'm committed to your mission, they're committed to theirs, and when that gets the focus, typically the resolution becomes more obvious. We do specialty work for the city of Naperville. I've had the Naperville Park District for a long time. We ended a war there. The prior council was always at war with the city. Even though we only did specialty work for the city, we were able to find a way by focusing on mission to end the war. And now they move forward in this collaborative way. And it's a tribute to their executive director. And I get some of the credit. I think that's probably overstated. But nevertheless, I put it on the resume for resolving those kinds of conflicts. So in this case, we would do the same thing here. If we're fortunate enough to be appointed by you, I wouldn't work on any City of Park Ridge stuff. And their team, which is Julie and Adam Simon, really, wouldn't work on your stuff. Adam Simon does have the IMET litigation and a couple of things, and if any of that impacts you, you'd get his knowledge that way, but generally he wouldn't work on your day-to-day stuff. And that's the way we preserve sort of the ethical conflicts, just in case there gets to be any friction. But in preparing for the interview, I talked to Julie about whether there were any friction points or conflict, and they said everybody's working along swimmingly, and that she didn't foresee one on the horizon.
Thank you.
Yes, Robert.
One of the questions that came up in the interview, and I'd like you to expound upon it because it was a difference maker for me, was the resources you provide to staff and others with your clients from a best practices sharing kind of situation. I thought that was very unique and could be very helpful with a lot of topics the board has discussed just in the last couple of years.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about that. So we do have twice a year what are called directors' breakfasts, where we invite our executive directors and typically the president of the board to come join us for breakfast. And while we put on a little show as the lawyers about different topics that are out there, it's often a opportunity for the directors to talk among themselves and about how they've resolved some problems. So we do that twice a year. We have white papers that go to everybody on an immediate topic. I just did a presentation for 200 people on, for example, cannabis in the parks, what it's going to mean for your conduct in the parks ordinance. And it was a free event through IPRA and the Illinois Park Law Enforcement Association, and then all of our clients got an invite to come and do that. That's another way we share information. We speak more than anybody else at conference. So if you're there, you'll see us. I've got 4 speeches alone this year. Another way we work with staff. So between, and then we have a couple of blogs and free email publications. One of them is Municipal Minute. So that's frequently filled with Freedom of Information Act issues or HR issues, where this is going to impact you. You need to be alert for this. And so we try to keep people ahead of the curve. That's just a simple subscription. It's free. And then if you need templates for things, we have a library on our website that you're welcome to go to and download. So we make that available to everybody. I'll give you another example. Just today, there's a park district who has been approached to put solar panels on a few different places, and they want to know how to go about it. And I said, well, I can give you the legal answer, but if you want a practical answer, talk to so-and-so at a different park district. It was essentially you at a different park district, and I had put those 2 people together, and they're off to the races. It's one of those things where it doesn't cost you money. Staffs are talking to each other. We've already solved the problem one place. You can follow along in that. Terrible business model for me, based on an hourly basis of pay, but it works to keep the clients happy. And so that's what we try and do is when you represent 54 park districts, there's hardly a problem we haven't seen somewhere else before. So let's put people together to figure out how to solve it as a pragmatic matter.
Yeah, you'll see some new ones here, I guarantee you.
Good. That makes life
No, not
interesting.
good.
Well, that means you're doing new things to serve your community.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Couple questions. First, I'm trying to understand structurally how you're going to service us. So, will you be taking over the work that Superintendent DeGangi does on our union matters or is that staying the way it is?
So we do have
HR issues and
we do have a labor department, and it's available to assist to the extent you need it. But we have clients who conduct their own collective bargaining and they do their own contract negotiation. If they need us to be at the table, we're there, but we don't necessarily have to be.
yeah, no, I understand that we have done our own, but I know that we've had HR issues come up and we get advice from council and it hasn't been Tom. So is it going to be these guys or is it going to continue to be whoever it was we used in the past?
Yeah, so right now we use Chris Jolly from Littleton. Yeah, and he will continue with our labor issues and our union negotiations at this time. There is times when there's employee issues that don't rise to the level of utilizing Chris, mainly when it's not a union issue, and we deal with PDERMA and our general counsel. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a mix.
Okay. So my other question is, 90 to 95% of the things that I've heard come through this board that we need advice on, or what I would refer to as typical corporate type stuff that you need some basic legal advice. But once in a while, I feel like we've gotten pushed around with threats of litigation. And so it's been my feeling that when that happens, we need representation in a firm that can handle that you have somebody on staff that would be able to assist us with that. Do you have that or?
Well, I'm in court frequently, and I came to this sector doing construction litigation. So when it comes to real estate and your public works kinds of projects where you're constructing things, acquiring land, easement rights, all those things, I'm in court on those now. And we do have a litigation department of litigators. Of our 35 lawyers, there are 15 who do nothing but litigation. They don't come to the corporate meetings. There are some of us, like me, who have a foot on both the litigation side and the corporate side. We're ready to handle any piece of litigation you have. It's rare, I would say, if one came your way. We've done everything from the litigation to dissolve a park district to form one, and everything in between. So yes, we're there to handle that. I would say one of the reasons I suggested Glenview to Gale is we've had some litigation there, and I don't, people like to think that the Park District's some sort of secondary unit of government to others, like the county or the city. It ain't so, not under the Constitution, and that's why I think our Park District clients we recognize your constitutional equality, and it's on land use matters, for example. I've had about half a dozen cases where we were getting to court to get what we needed, which was lights on a field or an artificial turf field, where the municipality was giving us a hassle. And when it comes to interfering with your mission, their limits of authority end. And we've gone to court over that and been successful. So I think we can handle all of your litigation needs.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
All right, well, thank you. And they say always ask for the job, and so I'm asking for the job. We'd like to be your lawyer, and I'd like to come to your meetings and get to know you all and work for you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very
Thank you.
much.
Nice to meet you.
I think we'll have an opportunity to discuss more as a board later in the agenda. But moving ahead, it is now time. So I'm going to turn this over to Commissioner Ledoux.
And I'm going to turn this over to Superintendent.
DeAngelis, thank you, Commissioner Leduc. On page 2 of your board packet, I've provided the board with a memo related to the action items on the budget for this board meeting. But before adopting the budget and appropriation ordinance, we do want to discuss a number of the areas that I've outlined to get the board's consensus and direction on whether or not we want to make any changes to the budget and appropriation ordinance as presented in the board meeting packet. So there were a couple of adjustments, which I outlined in the memo, to the proposed budget from what was published previously. And those have been incorporated in the budget and appropriation document that is in the packet. So if anyone has any questions about that, I could clarify that first section that explains those changes. I did have a question from one of the commissioners on that, so I just wanted to make sure that it was clear. In the proposed budget that is published on the district's website, we expected an operating surplus and estimated we'd be able to transfer $350,000 to the capital fund at the end of the 2020 year. We've made a couple of increases in expenditures, and that would then reduce that amount to be transferred to $330,000. So I was just highlighting those changes. So if no one has any questions about any of that, we can get into the first area.
I had one
Sure.
quick question. Regarding the increase in legal fees, could you speak a little more to that?
So we are proposing this recommended change in council. We just heard from Dirk, and we've just, as we've looked at prior years' history of expenses, we thought it was prudent to allow for a little more because there were, I think, a couple of items that have been considered by the board that we have been kind of holding off to determine which way we were going to go with our legal representation, which may take up more hours than we would have previously used, as well as just the transition to get up to speed, maybe reviewing our policies, documents, procedures, things of that nature.
Any other commissioner questions? All right, proceed.
Thank you. So the first area is salaries and wages. As I've outlined in the memo, the proposed budget reflects a 3% salary increase pool. The 2.2% grade range adjustment that Manager DeGangi had explained during the compensation presentation. And a $20,000 performance incentive pool for full-time employees. Also, a 3% salary increase for part-time employees. And I also added that the budget also includes this compensation study, which there had been some discussion about. So I just wanted to remind you all of that. I did not receive any additional feedback in this area, so we wanted to get the board's consensus whether that we were okay with not making any changes to any of the salary components in the proposed budget.
Sanitizer tonight.
So with that summary, I'll turn it back over to Commissioner Leduc to kind of lead the board discussion on that topic.
Yeah, do any other commissioners have any questions or comments? Commissioner Harrington?
So I had shared previously that I had some concerns about the compensation study at this point in time. Understanding that it had been a while and understanding from your sharing the rationale behind it is very important. However, with the minimum wage increase and with kind of projections out, I just have some concern about doing this study right now because I think there is going to be a whole host of changes happening in the salary world and impacts because of the minimum wage increase in Illinois. So previously, I had kind of shared that I thought it was maybe prudent to wait on that study, which is my opinion.
If I could just add, I think we did in some of our response communication try to, we discussed it staff internally, and I think felt that to have sort of a baseline so we would know maybe what was a result of these minimum wage changes could also be valuable. That was just one thing I wanted to make sure that the board had heard.
Oh, would you mind stepping up to the microphone? Thank you.
So after that meeting, I contacted our compensation consultant at Verisight. That's their former Aon. And so I asked her that very question. And her opinion was this is the best time to do it. This is her opinion. Because it will help us get an idea of where our full-time employees are. And therefore, the part-time employees who are impacted by minimum wage will be able to better plan and know if there is compression between those employees who are affected by minimum wage and then those that are not, including all of our full-time employees. So that was her perspective, which I understand that.
Sure.
I understand both sides, actually.
Is there a best practice around when to do the compensation study? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years?
5 years.
Okay.
3 to 5.
Okay, that's helpful.
So it's quite some time. And I think I did point out before that the compensation study itself cost us, right? But what it also does is help us determine if the full-time employees, if their jobs are in the right grade, right? And if their increases based on merit are appropriate for that range. So if they're in the wrong range, they could be getting the wrong increase because the job is in the wrong grade. So that's impacted as well. But I did reach out and, I do get both sides. But without it, we really won't know if those affected by minimum wage, how far away they are from the full-time employees, their supervisors, their managers.
And I think to add to that, Harmony, is that we have at least 4 or 5 positions, I feel like, that we feel have a need right now to be reassessed. And we kind of pushed them because we said, well, let's just do all 50, 54, whatever it is at this point. But so there's a couple that are outstanding. We could do them individually, but we decided Diane did not.
It's tough to do it individually.
Oh.
Because if you do them individually, you're still not lining them up with those that are in higher levels or those within lower levels because we're not sure if those are correct because 9 years has passed. So what Gail said is I have 4 people, 4 individual jobs that were really like, are these in the right grade? Yeah, we could look at those jobs individually, But unless you look at all of them, which we're not sure if they're right, we may be placing them in the wrong grade. So,
Commissioner.
Clarifying point then, back to Commissioner Harrington's point relative to best practices. The jobs, just the 3 or 4 jobs, there's people in the jobs,
oh yeah, these are
and they've accepted the compensation levels
oh yeah,
there.
sure.
So the question would be, is it relates to midpoint? Is that really what you're trying to define more? Because you're within a range, obviously, because they accepted.
Midpoint's a good yes, that is a good point. They may be in their current job and already above midpoint.
Okay.
So their raises are much smaller. The higher you go up in your range, the smaller your increases, right? So these particular jobs may be very high in their range already. Well, maybe those jobs belong in a higher range, which means they would be eligible for a larger increase.
Right.
So they are directly impacted.
But just to clarify, you set the range, you set the grade,
Mhm.
correct, with probably counsel from Gail?
No,
Our consultants, we have a consultant for labor, but yeah, we review them.
compensation consulting firm, which was Aon, it was a spinoff of Aon. They're the ones that analyze every job.
Know them.
Yeah. So they're the ones that went out to the marketplace and got the data and put together the structure, and then we age it every year.
But not the recent ones.
No, only the recent ones that we've had to do is an add to staff where it was a newly created job. So say if there was a newly created job, there was never an incumbent in that job, then I would go out to the consultant and get market data for that job and plug it in.
No, I get that. So you haven't created any recent grades or different
No,
levels.
no.
And the ones you have put these people into recently, you just want to make sure it fits the job task that they're at with the compensation structure that surrounds them on the midpoint, low point, high point type scenario.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so saying all that, let's play the devil's advocate. What is the harm really of waiting on this? Back to Commissioner Harrington's point.
Well, it's kind of twofold.
Sure.
And as I said, I get both sides, but it's kind of twofold. One is those people who are in those jobs that may be moved up or down, they could be harmed financially because they're not getting the raises they deserve based on their performance. It's all
Okay.
performance based. So that's the negative. It's the incumbents themselves. The other negative is if we put it off, which we could do, we would have to put it off for probably, I don't know how long, until the minimum wage settles down, but we'll have that compression issue, but we won't know what it is. So the part-time staff who are going up to minimum wage, the new minimum wage, we really don't know the right margin between them and their superiors. So that's a little bit the negative, the drawback to in waiting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments? Questions? I actually had a question about the $20,000 performance incentive plan pool. Like how would that be determined? Who got a share of that and what share?
So it's a pool, and the superintendents throughout the year will identify individual initiatives or group initiatives that were above and beyond. They will make a proposal, and the proposal comes to myself and Gail, and we meet as a team, and all the superintendents will present their recommendations to Gail and I with a recommended dollar amount. And after their presentation, Gail and I, determine whether or not it was warranted, or we compare, for kind of uniformity across the district. And we determine if the dollar amount is appropriate for that initiative. Then if the budget, of course, is available. And then we award them to the employees. The superintendents get recommendations from their managers, from their subordinates. And those managers, I believe, even get recommendations from first-line supervisors. So it's kind of a ripple effect.
So it's basically like a bonus compensation.
It's a performance award. Yeah, it's a bonus. I mean, in the corporate world, a dollar amount isn't comparable, but yes, it is a bonus.
And there's predetermined amounts that we go, as a guide in terms of, the steps, right? So there's a range of different amounts.
So depending on what level you are, you're eligible for a
No, depending on the task or the project. So we look at that, and then we've got some baseline from some other years. So it's actually worked quite well.
So the lowest is $250.
All right. Thank you for clarifying that for me. Any other comments?
Just a point of order. So on this, as we go down this, just so I understand the memo and how we're doing, are you asking first to get consensus on each of the one, two, three?
Yes.
Thank you.
And maybe even subsets as we get into some of the points that have been raised.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood the order.
Absolutely, yes. So if we could,
All right, if we can continue then,
or to,
or should we do a vote on this?
yes, please.
Consensus.
Mhm.
So you just go down and say, what do you think? Yes or no?
All right. Yeah, I guess I'll start off.
Pull out a part of it, right? If you want a part of it,
All right, so let's start at the end. Commissioner Coyne?
I need a minute to digest.
Awesome.
Commissioner Tuttle?
I'd say yes. I'm still kind of on the fence about the compensation study until, like, good points were brought up by Commissioner Leach and Harrington. But yes, overall.
Commissioner Grau?
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington?
Yes, minus compensation study.
Commissioner Leach?
Yes, minus compensation study.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Yes, but I'm okay with the compensation study.
And I myself am a yes, so seems like, well, there are some reservations. Oh,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry, I forgot.
Well, no,
Forgot to circle back to
We
you.
have
you can circle back to me. Everything else is fine. The compensation study issue, I think, as Commissioner Tunnel said, I'm sort of on the fence about whether or not that's a good spend or not at this time. So I'm not really helpful, I guess, because I'm making a decisive thing. But if I had to, right now, if we were casting a yes/no vote, I'd say no to that part.
But the rest.
The rest looks fine.
Would we be able to say yes to the rest and table the compensation study for?
So my goal is to publish the budget and appropriation ordinance, and that is, really outlining the proposed expenses. We need to have that on public display for 30 days before the board votes on the budget and appropriation ordinance, which we have scheduled for the last meeting in December. So the goal at this meeting was to get the direction to make any changes. So if I'm, counting noses, I'm hearing no to that. I need to subtract 23,000 from this line item in the general fund, unless you all want to rethink it and come back to this, later this evening. But I'd like to kind of hit them and, let's make the decision and move on.
what would make you change your mind? I guess, that we can get you more information, we'd be happy to do that. Or if you want to think about it, we can come back to it later tonight, or?
I'm not I'm just not convinced that we can't do this on the fly as we go along. I mean, it doesn't strike me as a necessary spend right now when we can make these adjustments, and then if people are in the wrong tier, the wrong, what is it, range, we have to come back and figure that out. I guess I don't fully understand why we would need to do that right now. And I wasn't given a really compelling argument for it.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Maybe I can help you out,
Sure.
or at least why I think the way I think. The concern that I voiced on the compensation program is when you look at the data that she gave us in terms of where people are and how they're all ranked, it's skewed. It's not the way my experience has seen it in corporate America, where there's kind of a random distribution curve, and it's skewed to the heavy side. So above average and way above average and all this. And so what it says to me is that the performance ratings are being skewed in order to give a larger increase. And so I'm good with doing this to take a look at the structure to say, hey, where do these things really need to be? Because maybe they're not correct. And so that's why I'm in favor of it. It's been 9 years, and I just, it seems to me to be okay to take a look at it for that reason.
Commissioner Leach?
If I can just add a counter potentially to that point, Commissioner, I would suggest that if there is a skew of sorts, it's a tendency to go up that curve, not down that. So you're largely looking at an increase in this type of structure. I would also suggest that while it is a public entity, a lot of times the market will dictate where compensation should be and what is appropriate. So I would hate to suggest or think today that we have that challenge at that level, and I would like to normalize this a little bit in the future than do it right now, given all the things that we went through on the minimum wage and things that are coming up in front of us. So I'd like to get some of this nailed down and then deal with it versus pay a consultant $23,000 to do a paper that could be dated pretty fast. That's just my 2 cents.
Any other commissioners?
I would have to ask though. I don't understand what you mean by having it nailed down. I think the issue that we're being presented with here is that it's not nailed down, and they want to nail it down. So how does not doing anything nail it down? I don't get it.
So they're going to do a study, correct?
Yeah.
And they're going to look at all the employees. And I think there's 2 points. If we could you speak again to the 2 points you raised as to why we should do it? My last 2 points. If you remember, I said, why are the 2 compelling points to do it now versus wait? And you answered them better, and I'm going to be able to regurgitate.
I hope I can repeat it.
Sure, close enough is
So,
fine.
Why do it now? There are incumbents in these grades right now
Right.
who their job may be in the wrong grade.
Yep.
And they could be negatively impacted right now because the raises that they're eligible for
Mhm.
may be smaller than what the market would dictate. So if they were in a higher grade range, if that's what the market dictates, they would fall lower in the range, which means their raise would be a little bit larger. So they could be negatively impacted if their jobs are in the wrong grade. And that would start with merit reviews effective 1/1. So every year, their raise may be skewed. So they could be negatively impacted. And the reverse could be true too. They could be in a range that's maybe perhaps their job should be in a lower range. Don't know. So that was the one reason, compelling reason. The second was I consulted with our compensation professional, Verisight, and they had said that the timing would be most appropriate now because of minimum wage and because of the change of so many employees being brought up to the minimum wage, that to compare them to their superiors, their supervisors, we really don't know if there's compression issues or how large or how small they are. To be able to really forecast to see if those part-time employees are making so much more than they did before that they're so close to that of their supervisors who are managing them. So we don't know if those supervisors are in the right compensation level. So those are 2, if I hit that right.
Right. So if I try to answer your question, Commissioner O'Donnell, I believe we're talking about a graph that we've spent in the last couple of meetings a lot of time discussing how it could be, I forget, Sandra, a $700,000 impact or something like that over the next 5 years. 900. I'm sorry, a short 2. So $900,000 impact, how that's going to affect. But everything I've heard, I think, again, is it's an upward pressure to compensation. So if we do it, and we do it now, we're once again leading into increasing salaries and compensation, going into another rising dynamic with the minimum wage. Fair to say?
We don't know.
Correct, because that's why you do the study.
That's why we do the study. Right.
And there's part of my challenge. I believe it is loaded to increase our compensation structure going into the minimum wage, which we've already spent an hour or 2 just trying to figure out and understand what those impacts would be, plus what our options are under the law and statute. So there's why right now I'd like to digest part of that, which I think was the term I was trying to use. Let it settle, let us understand the impacts in a real scenario, not just some graphs. No offense, Sandra, that really say, here's what we're dealing with in each year now, given our employee distribution. That's where I was.
Commissioner Dow?
If there is a compression issue, I would think we'd want to know about it sooner rather than later. And doing the study does not mean you have to implement the changes, right?
Absolutely correct. So why do it now? I gave, two perspectives. The one is about the employees, the incumbents who are currently in the jobs that may be in the wrong grade. The raises that they're eligible for may be more or less, but we still have to be within the budget that you've approved, which, for example, the 3%. So you are correct. We don't need to make any changes to the employee's salary directly. They still have to be within the 3% merit pool. But the compression issue, if we determine there is a big compression issue, you are correct. We don't need to make any change. We just need to know what it is and how we might approach it if there is an issue. And what the proposal would be, I don't know. But you are correct. No, we don't need to make any changes.
Just one thing to add to that. I don't want to give the wrong impression, and Diane doesn't either, that we feel we have people that will need to be bumped up then to this next range and get this big raise. We feel like that they would, we don't know, but we feel like that they would be somewhere within this next range. They'd be on the lower part of it, right? Because they're on such the high part of this. It will affect them on the scale because we do performance-based and they get lower the longer they're here. So that's where you'd see it. It's not this big jump up to the next range. So just want to clarify.
I don't expect anyone of our incumbents would be under the minimum for the grade range that they would be put in. Again, it's really they're impacted by merit reviews.
One more question. If the board didn't want to go forward with this, what would we be spending to look at, which we've done in the past, for the individuals, the people that we thought we really needed to do, because we were concerned about, leaving, for another place of employment. What are we spending a person to do that? Do you remember?
Well, the thing is, we don't want to wait until they're looking for their
Right,
employment.
right.
That's a big part, a part of it. I think it's a ballpark about $500 a job. A job, yes. But again, you'd be looking at one job and not really knowing if it's the appropriately placed because you don't know if the job above it or below it is in the right range. But about $500 a pop.
We could be spending $2,000, to do that. I mean, I would recommend that if you're not.
It's a patchwork. I mean, it's definitely an option.
Yeah.
It's not the best option. I don't think. It's been so long, but it's definitely an option.
I would rather know what's coming ahead of us in terms of compression. Either we have it or we don't. If it's a big problem, we need to know about it this year so we can plan for next year.
I agree. I understand.
You want to go around again just to make sure because you guys you said no.
Yeah, I said no.
I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I think Commissioner Tunnel was still on the fence.
I wouldn't be opposed to if you're concerned about supervisors, if that's where the need is on an individual supervisor basis, I would consider that. I'd say overall, I think it's a lot of money.
I'd say we're spending a lot of time talking about $23,000.
Commissioner Harrington, any more?
Same position.
Okay, so in the interest of direction, I heard 3 commissioners that were good with it, 3 that were not, 1 that would think about a compromise. Gail has recommended that we would need $2,000 to do the one-off positions. So am I hearing the direction that we should reduce this contractual service line item by $21,000?
Well, I had a question. If it costs around $2,000 to do a one-off, I know you can't predict exactly how many and when you're going to have to do that, but like looking historically over the last few years, like how often does this come up in a given fiscal year?
Couple times a year, this past year, probably more so, this last 2 years, and that could be the labor market. But it doesn't come up that often, but the last couple of years, I have 4 or 5 right now that are kind of in a queue waiting.
And so, if we did this, like for how, like because there is a changing minimum wage, like how long would it go before we'd have to go back to piecemeal meal? I mean, I know you can't predict that exactly, but if you had to estimate.
Every 3 to 5 years. That's the standard when we talk about best practice. It's usually 3 to 5. I usually push it off to 5. 3 to me is a little bit too soon, but 5 years.
And Gail, have you talked to, your equals in other park districts to see like how often they're doing this kind of study?
I have not. Diane usually talks to her peers about that in the HR world.
I haven't pulled them. I usually look to human resources, Manager Association of Illinois, SHRM, and those types of organizations. But I have not pulled my counterparts on if they assess their grade ranges and how often. So it's something I haven't done yet.
Okay. Well, any other comments on the issue?
I'll change my opinion to a hard no in light of the fact that we can do these one-off type situations, and then we can take a look at it. I'm all in favor of having as much information to management as you can to make proper, into HR to make proper decisions going forward. But I think there are a lot of moving parts with the minimum wage coming up, and in light of the fact that we can make some adjustments on a case-by-case basis to try to keep good staff here, I think we should probably go that route.
All right.
So $2,000 should be,
Are you okay keeping $2,000 in there for that purpose?
Well, if it comes up like a couple times a year, should we make that a little higher? I guess assuming.
500 and above.
Oh, I get it. So.
Yeah, I think we're good with 2,000.
Oh, okay.
We
Perfect.
need more, we can make adjustments with him.
okay, so I will be reducing under the corporate fund, the contractual service line by $21,000. Thank you for that. The next item is fees. In the memo, I had pointed you to the operating budget slide presentation where we went into detail on the fees that were proposed. I would remind you that staff was directed to increase fees by no more than 1.9%, with the exception then of those areas that were identified in the presentation. Subsequent to all the information that I sent around last week, we did get from some of the commissioners some areas of concern or discussion. So I've distributed in front of you this piece of paper entitled 2020 Proposed Budget Items Identified for Board Discussion. And under fees, there were a few items, so I'd like to go through each one, have the staff's response, give it back to Commissioner Leduc to lead the board discussion, and get consensus on these issues that have been raised by commissioners. So the first one is increasing the non-resident daily swim rate at Centennial Pool. The suggestion was to raise that to $10 or $2 less than at Des Plaines Mystic Waters, and increase non-resident by same percentage. The staff's response was to refer to page 1 and 2 of the budget follow-up operating presentation file, which was distributed to you last week, and there's a copy in front of you. In that operating fund supplemental information, down at the bottom of page 1 and the beginning of page 2, there was a lot of data on the pool fees. So then I would give it back to, go ahead, for the board discussion.
Oh,
Yeah.
Commissioner O'Donnell, sure.
I don't understand what this means, what you said here. So increase the daily swim rate non-resident to $10. I get that. That's pretty clear. But then it goes on to say increase non-resident by same percentage. I don't understand what that means. We're increasing it to $10.
I was,
I can take a guess.
I think I
Would
was
like me
just
to take a
copying and
guess?
pasting from the questions.
I
that we
think what I was
received.
maybe trying to suggest is if we had a non-resident pass of some sort or something other than, I think I've heard punch cards, I've heard just different things. I'm not all the up on the vernacular of all the things we do.
So all of the ways we charge non-residents.
Yeah, you just keep it at the same percentage. So it wasn't meant to confuse and say the same 2 times in a sentence, Jim. It was meant to say if there's other things, just raise it by the same percentage overall, if that makes sense.
We increased the non-resident rate last year as well, right?
We increased just the passes in 2018, and then the non-resident fees for dailies in 2017.
So just to clarify, that was 2 years ago and 3 years ago by the budget, or are you by timeline?
By timeline. So in
Okay.
the year of 2018, we did just the passes, the pool passes, and then in 2017, we did the daily fees.
So then my other question is, are we only talking about the youth from 9 to 10?
Yeah, because
Not these adult fees?
the adult's already at 13 for non-resident.
Correct.
If I understood the second part in the clarification, he was saying every non-resident would go up a commensurate percentage. Is that what I understood you say? So that would be the adults too, right?
So let me just clarify it, since again I wrote it. The secret's out. What I basically was saying was, if you're taking your kids over to the Splains, Mystic Waters, nice park, and they're charging over there $12 for our kids, right? I think that's what's saying.
For
So-
youth.
For youth and
Yes.
14 for adults. I'm saying increase it to 10, or if you want to say it the other way, $2 less. So in that graph, because I didn't have the graph with me, Commissioner O'Donnell, I would say daily fee non-resident adult should be 12, and daily fee non-resident youth would be 10. So we're talking of a net increase of $1, right? And I wouldn't want to reduce one.
So wait, I'm
So
sorry.
just think of it as it's either or. Meaning- We wouldn't decrease. I would not. That was not the intent. I didn't have the graph.
But you didn't want to increase the adult non-resident.
No, I wouldn't, because I'm just trying to suggest that if you know, I think Mystic Waters offers different amenities, right? I think it's different. I think it's a little bit of a destination, but I also think we're fooling ourselves if we don't think Centennial is now a destination for some kids out of and their families outside of the residence. So I just simply looked if we can inch that up and have them pay a more fair share, given the fact that we already have the chair issues and things we continue to hear. It's just another way to gain a buck or two. That's it.
One of the other things that we put in, I think one of the responses that we have seen in the surveys that the Park Ridge residents are going elsewhere to bring their guests. So that's something we have seen since we did increase the non-resident fees, that we're making it too expensive for the non-residents to come.
Any other, Commissioner? Commissioner Coyne? Did you have your finger up to signal, or were you just?
Well, no, I was thinking but it's all about how many people are coming. It's not about how many people are coming through the door. It's how much money's coming through the door. So if we certainly don't want to, price ourselves into the point where people aren't coming. but aren't we like operating at pretty close to capacity on the good days anyway? And so and these are daily fee things, this isn't the pool pass deal. So it's really, if we're operating at capacity anyway, then kind of what I'm not sure that I don't want to say it too harshly because it's on the on a public record, but I'm not quite so concerned about whether non-resident or residents, for that matter, have to have priced themselves away because we have a full pool. That's just my comment. I don't have a real opinion on whether or not we should change the fees per se, but I wouldn't object to it. If we had empty pools and we wanted to get people in, then it might be a different story. Kind of like the fitness center, we've talked about changing the fees there to bring people in. Here, we're not, unless I'm misreading it, we're not really worried about bringing people in.
No, not on the nice days.
Any other commissioners?
Well, I'm
Commissioner O'Donnell?
okay with this, but again, I want to understand exactly what it is that we're proposing. So your proposal is to take on the daily fee non-resident youth from $9 to $10.
Correct.
I'm okay with that.
That's it.
And are you?
I didn't have that benefit before.
Okay, so are you proposing to change this adult down to 12? Or
No,
are you saying to
just
leave
leave
it
it
at
the same.
13? Okay.
Yep. In this case, it only affect youth.
So we're just talking about the
Daily
one
fees.
daily fee.
Yep.
Just going from 9
Because you don't offer a non-resident pool pass, apparently.
do.
Oh, well, what's that price?
But not just for kids, right?
No, it's a non-resident pass. Non-residents can buy passes as well.
That was, just to be clear, that was the reason I put the second part of the sentence in, was just to say, if you're at, let's just say it's what is that? I'm not good at math. 1 or 2%, 10%, 8% increase, right? I don't know what that exactly is. 8%? One? That is 1. I was confused. So, no, it'd be 11, yeah. So if it's 11% increase, only thing I was saying is the non-resident pass for Centennial increased by 11%. That's the simplest logic I was trying to suggest.
Do we know how that stacks up against competition?
Yeah,
Do we know that
First,
number
I'm
makes
reading it
sense?
too.
Yes, that was in the communication. We have for non-residents, Des Plaines was 12 and 14. We're talking about youth and adult. Glenview was 11 and 11. Northbrook is 9 and 10.
I don't understand what you're reading.
Oh, I don't think they're asking about the dailies. I think they're talking
Oh.
about like the summer pass.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Non-resident.
He's talking
We
about
have
increasing the
I
pay.
have
data
that.
So
for
how does that fit in?
non-resident
It's on this page.
passes.
Passes?
That's the,
It's on your packet.
no, that's the
No, we're
dailies.
talking about
That's just
the
dailies.
season pass.
I'm so sorry.
So with our proposed increase, as an example, the preseason resident individual is $86. The resident after preseason is $101, and then the non-resident is $152. That's for an individual.
And so we would be talking about
Adult.
an 11% increase to the 152, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a June?
And how does that stack up against Des Plaines, Glenview, and Northbrook?
Glenview non-resident individual is, they actually have a preseason for non-resident, and this was last year. We didn't have didn't have their new rates at the time of the poll. They had a preseason 2019 non-resident rate of 121 and non-resident rate after preseason of 140.
And ours are set right now as how?
The proposed 2020 would be 152. We did.
So I don't know if you would want to increase that.
No, I don't think you'd want to go above them.
No.
That's why I was trying to use the $2 or whatever I was saying below. Meaning, we're just trying to get what the market's bearing. That's all I was trying to do.
All right, should we see what the consensus is then on this issue? How about Commissioner Foy, you want to lead us off again? Or do you want me to start with somebody else?
Start with somebody else.
No, that's good. I think that increasing the, so we're just talking about increasing the daily non-resident youth fee to
At Centennial
From
only.
$9
correct?
to $10.
Centennial only.
Yes.
To $10.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure why we have to have full consensus. But
I
that's
would
okay.
agree.
It's a dollar, but I'm fine, yes, I'm fine with that.
This is more to the tune of no greater fee increase than 1.9%, correct?
Unless there's a market
Yes,
merit. Yeah,
correct.
pretty much.
Well, and it's a change to what's been published in the
Yeah.
proposed budget and what's currently in the summary of amounts. Well, it's not an expense, so it will be reflected
Revenue.
in the certificate of the fiscal officer estimated revenues. So I don't know what the exact dollar amount of that is, but if the board, if I'm hearing consensus, I don't think everyone weighed in, but
I guess, let's just make it more general. Is there anyone who's not in favor of it?
Me.
Commissioner Grau, do you have any?
Well, we're getting feedback that our residents cannot bring non-residents to our pool. So, and I think we're getting way down low in the weeds. So,
All right. Anyone else? Is everybody else in favor of just the $1 for non-resident youth? All right.
okay, thank you. We'll ask April if I can ask you to ask your staff to make that change in the budget planning module.
Mm-hmm.
And if they could do that tomorrow morning,
Sure.
that's possible. Great. Thank you. Just make my note. The next item was, can we look at reducing basketball fees? Staff has provided a lot of data related to basketball. The budgeted margin for youth basketball is about 18%, and other programs are most often 30 to 40%. We understand our price point is higher for youth basketball leagues. We do have a larger expense than other competing programs to rent the school district gyms. The 2020 budget, we have a $38,100 expense line specifically for school gym rentals. We've provided registration information in the attachment through the end of October. The areas highlighted in green are where registrations were still being accepted at the end of October, so it wasn't the full program data, but it's a similar point in time, right, April? I think there was also a question about the adult basketball league, and April's provided some information that we had 4 teams register this season, but they did not want to play with just 4 teams, so the league was canceled. So now I would turn it back over to you to lead the board discussion on whether any adjustments to basketball fees are desired.
I was just wondering before I turn it to open it up, but in previous years, like how many teams on average were registering for the adult basketball league? All right, so Commissioner Harrington?
I nominate our intergovernmental liaison to negotiate a better rate with D64 on our gym.
Great.
Everybody in consensus on that? Any other comments? Commissioner Leach?
So I'll hit at this one a little bit. So my point here is less about revenues and expenses and more about quality of life. So I think the adult leagues provide a great quality of life and exercise and recreation for the community. What I'd like to understand before I go any further into the youth side is on 2B, you mentioned our price point is higher for youth basketball leagues. Do we know, like, if you compare it to Niles, I get it. I understand the differences in the community. I just want to understand what that price point difference is. My son hasn't played basketball in a couple years.
And Rob, you were saying 38,000. I mean, that's really the big reason that we struggle to lower those fees is
Yep.
because, like Niles, they don't have to. I don't think they're running school gyms, but I don't know that. I guess.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not.
That's probably why it's an unfair comparison.
It is. Yeah,
Right.
That's what
And I would say that again on the record, Mr. Coyne. I have no problem saying on the record it's an unfair comparison. I just feel the pain that certain families may have, and I know you have assistance programs and different things like that to consider. I just want to know that difference. Like, what are we talking here? Is it the $1 like the pool, or is it more?
Niles is 92 and ours is 138.
Right.
Or the same for all age range. There's a couple different price points based on the different programs,
So,
but that's girls basketball grades 2 to 5.
so I know I'm one of the commissioners. I'm sure there's others that have voiced this issue, and I know we've talked about it in the past. The question I have goes back to a little bit of the pool concept on Centennial, back to capacity. Based on that hard number of 38,000, how much more capacity do we have to absorb more volume? And can we win this game a little bit better on a volume basis by filling it up and keeping it going later or with more games? Versus, is that a hard flat versus a variable expense?
There's certain gyms that we're unable to use based on their programming and the after-school programming. They're doing a little bit more.
Okay.
We also had to bring back our practices once we took over the Beyond the Bell program, which shortened the time frame also. We're also really unable to use our gym spaces currently because of other programs and rentals in the evening. So Main Park is out and the fitness center is out for the most part, unless it's an emergency situation. So, if we would expand more, it would just be on the availability of the schools and as much as we could squeeze in. There's not that much room for expansion
Of teams and leagues, or
based on the space that we
yeah, no, that's a very fair point. That's why I just want to, on the record, just make sure everybody understands the concept. But I would love the fact if there's a way to get more space. But again, we also know from surveys, we just do not have a lot of gym or indoor space.
we would have to be taking something away from renters or other programs at Main Park
Okay.
or the fitness center.
Okay, thank you.
And we do have a lot of regular basketball players at the, that was the comment at, when they talked to the adult leagues that, well, we play at the fitness center anyway, so we're just trying to get something going. So at least they're still using our facilities.
Yeah.
For the adults.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other commissioner?
Yeah, I can't do the math. I'm probably less skilled at math than Commissioner Leach is. But 38,000 is pretty expensive rental fee. But I don't know, and I don't know how that translates out. Like, how low would we have to bring it to actually bring our? If we got rid of the 38,000 completely, would it? Would we be able to bring that fee down to less than or comparable to, say, Niles?
We'd have to work the numbers. I
Right.
don't know if it would be exactly down to
Okay.
that. But we could.
But we don't know where and do we know where the school district came up with the 38,000? How they?
Yes, we do.
Did they just make it up and say we're going to make some money off it, or?
It's based on the custodial overtime rate.
Okay. And we have to do, and there's no other way around those not, so they're not marking it up and using that money for
Have pages
books
long
and whatnot.
track and go back and make sure we've used all
Okay.
the time.
All right. Right.
That's on the invoice.
Great, thanks. Maybe we could trade fertilizer for the, sorry.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Just as my experience as a coach in the program, so like I can say that the capacity is really tight right now. We have 3 to 4 teams practicing in Lincoln, and we're all like last week we didn't even have a basket to use, so that's a concern for the program. But I do admire like the opportunities maybe explore in the future, like the summer programs to be competitive with Niles. I take teams there in the summertime, have a great time there. We could bring it home to Park Ridge in the summertime possibly. Um, and also maybe just take a look at like more sponsorship opportunities, like to offset the $38,000. I'm sure if we like communicate with the Chamber of Commerce, there'd be a lot of businesses that might want to help support that for the parks. So something to consider in the future.
Yeah, we do reach out to the businesses, and we do have some sponsors on the. Mhm.
Maybe I could help lead the push, so we need some new equipment, better T-shirts or jerseys or something. So, but thank you for everything you guys do. I know it's a complicated program to run, and I know Jim and his team does a great job.
Oh, thank you.
Trying to manage all the pieces, but there's a lot going on capacity wise right now.
Mhm.
We lower the fees, like I don't think that we can handle it right now as it is, but if we work together with school district, maybe we can just try to figure out, because I do think that this is a problem in our community right now. So just from my perspective, being a coach in the program. More space.
And Commissioner Leduc, I did look at the men's basketball league. After in the past 10 years, we've had 4, 5, 6, 6, 6, 5, 5.
So there hasn't been a drastic drop off.
No.
Thank you.
We just really have not seen big participation with adult leagues, period, at this district. Unfortunately, we tried the Bags League, that one for one summer.
So I was gonna say, so in terms of reducing the basketball fees, I mean, if we're stuck for now, at least with this $38,000 expense line, and it sounds like space is already tight for the leagues we have playing, like, does it even make sense to do that at this time? We're not recommending it. Any final thoughts on this? No? All right.
So thank you for the discussion on this one. I'm hearing that we will not make any adjustments to these fees. Great, thank you. Okay, the next topic on the agenda in the memo is the bond issue. Unless any commissioners have any other fee issues they would like to raise. Hearing none, we'll move on to the number 3 in the memo. The proposed budget reflects issuance of $1.5 million of limited general obligation bonds with final maturity of December 1, 2021 to finance the district's capital improvements. We had a presentation in September from PMA explaining this, and I can answer any other questions. I just wanted to make sure that I got the board's feedback that we were okay to proceed with this. I will turn it back to Commissioner Leduc for board discussion.
Yes, any commissioner comments or questions or thoughts? So is everyone okay then? All right.
Great, hearing none, we will proceed with that, and I think we would look toward doing the bond sale in January, so you can look forward to that. Now, the next one, number 4, everybody ready? For the proposed 2020 capital projects, I had circulated the list of capital projects in the board packet to remind you. We did have a number of items identified for discussion under this topic. So that begins on the second page. Oh, I forgot to number the pages, but under capital projects. And my thought was that we would go through each one. Staff has provided some type of response, and let the board discuss and let us know whether these items should be included or excluded from the budget. So the first one is to add expense of the district to match the Friends of the Park Foundation amounts raised to finish the outdoor classroom in 2020. I think Terry had some concerns on the timing. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Before we launch into some capital project discussion about which we think should be in, which we shouldn't, I just want to clarify that the budget as proposed contains a tax increase.
That's correct.
Okay, and so using that as our umbrella, the proposed budget contains a tax increase.
Mhm.
And so then all these capital projects also fall within that tax increase.
Well, so our capital is financed. So our capital fund is separate from our operating levies. And we do have this this limited bond levy that would be issued to pay debt service on the bonds we just talked about. We finance those capital improvements with the proceeds of these bond issues, and we've also advocated, and the district has done a great job of generating surplus that is transferred per our fund balance policy to the capital fund, in order to have kind of what's called pay-as-you-go funding, so that all of our capital funding is not funded by debt. So it's a great balance, I think, that we've been able to achieve. So what we talked about a little bit at the beginning was the way the proposed budget, which does include the what's allowable under the tax cap law to increase your tax levy, your operating levies by the CPI. And with that revenue included in the budget, we were projecting, with these adjustments, a $330,000 surplus, which would be transferred to the capital fund. So it's yes and no.
And without the tax increase, it would be 230,000.
So yes, the tax levy. So maybe we want to rearrange the order.
That's
We
kinda
have
what I was getting at.
we
So
have-
we could spend a lot of time discussing capital projects, but perhaps and I just as one commissioner just wanted to level set as far as what it potentially could do to the discussion if the levy were passed at that level or not.
Sure. So if we want to flip and talk about number 5 is the tax levy. That dollar amount associated with the 1.9% increase in our operating levy is $103,000. So if the board were to direct us to not include that CPI increase, that would reduce the 330 by 103, so we'd be at 227. Thank you, Terry. I can't do math in my head. 227,000 to transfer to capital. And if you recall, when we went through the capital presentation, we looked at our projections, and we have a lot of needs going forward, et cetera. So that would be the impact, yes.
Remind us of the last time the board decided to do an increase of CPI.
Bear with me one moment while I refer to the presentation that we reviewed before. Um, 2017.
It was voted on in 16.
Yeah, I was like, wait a second. Wait a second. Yeah, okay.
So do we want to talk about if there's direction from the board on the tax levy proposal?
I think that's what I heard.
I think that makes sense.
So if anyone else has any other questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I would let you all discuss.
I mean, what are the estimated long-term consequences of not taking the tax levy?
So it accumulates over time. So that that 103,000 in 2020, if we make an estimate of say it's 1.5% is the annual inflation rate. We don't know what the actual annual inflation rate will be, but it's been pretty consistent. What we presented when we looked at the operating budget was that with an assumption of a 1.5% annual increase, that would add up, over the next 8 years to about $900,000.
And so that would have a significant impact on our ability to work on these capital projects and maintain our facilities.
Yes. Yes. And in addition, we've also discussed, that we know we will have operating increases with the minimum wage going up as planned or, by law over the next 5 years. And it will, help us be able, the analysis that we looked at when I gave the presentation showed that by keeping up with inflation, we should be able to manage these increases and continue to generate ongoing surplus for pay-as-you-go capital. Whereas if we're not taking this, we may be able to manage these increased expenses, but the projections that we looked at would show that over that 5-year time period, we would not be able to continue to transfer surplus to the capital fund.
All right.
Point of clarification.
Mhm.
I think you're mentioning the graph of the
Mhm.
5 years
Mhm.
where you showed a profit in each of those 5 years
Mhm.
despite its declining trend, right?
Well,
It
I
went
think
down to as low as I think around $55,000 in the fifth year.
30,000, I think it was
30,000.
something like
so
that.
you technically, right, would be able to transfer 30,000.
Technically, yes, but
Okay.
Terry could spend
Oh, yeah.
30,000.
There's always something to buy.
Like a drop in the bucket, right? I mean,
I just wanted to just be clear. We were always in a positive over the next 5 years, as the graph you showed.
that is correct.
Correct.
Like I said, we would be. My feeling is that we would be able to manage those operating cost increases, but I'm not comfortable with where it leaves us as
Right.
far as providing for our ongoing capital needs.
I think the only thing I would add to that is that our capital projections and our capital budget projections does not include us having fund transfers of only $30,000. So
That's right.
while we stay with above water on that, we've never matched up and came back with a capital budget projection that says, well, here's what that makes this look like. Because that would show a negative of several $100,000, if not maybe $1 million by the time we got a couple years out. So.
Let me just ask a quick clarification, maybe for Gail. If we wanted to increase taxes, which is what I consider this, 5%, is that a restriction if we do that, let's say next year or 2021, any of those years? Can we do that annually if we wanted to versus the 1.9? Are we limited by the CPI?
Yes.
Only up to the CPI?
Or 5% if CPI is at.
I thought there was a special meeting we could ask for.
I'm just looking at the attorney in the room shaking his head. But
Let me show you my.
I thought I read the code. I think
The advice is worth what you
There's
pay
a couple
for.
of different
Remember that.
constraints.
The advice is worth what you pay. It's the difference between the levy, the ask, and the extension. This is always the hard part. You can ask for 10%. Right. The county will only extend the up to CPI against existing, plus last year's rate on new construction. So the question every year really for you all is, in determining, beyond all your other policy questions, is how much new construction did you have come on? Because if you had a lot come on this year under the assessor finally got, remember the assessor only does about a third of your community a year. The assessor finally got to the newest stuff in town, and it's now on your books. If you go low on your levy, that new stuff gets a discount forever. Unlike everybody else in town, the new stuff that's on now as new construction for the levy is getting a discount. And then they get their discount forever, unlike everybody else in town who's already been paying. If you haven't had a lot of new construction come on this year, and that the county gives you that estimate, then you don't have to worry about it so much. The 5% rule is if you're asking for 5% or more, you have to do what's called a truth in taxation, even though you're never going to get 5% if you're asking for it. And people balloon the levy. If you ever go into a seminar or conference or and you hear people say balloon the levy, they're doing it because they had a lot of new construction come on, or a TIF is expiring in some communities. When a TIF expires, you really want to be aggressive and nail it to get that as much now that increment's available to you. So those are the reasons people balloon the levy, and then they have the truth in taxation, even though they know for the average homeowner it's going to be 1.8% or lower. If you've got a lot of new construction coming on, the county will extend it, and that may actually drive your rate down. All that just depends on what you know about your community. So does that help with your?
Perfect.
All right. Commissioner Harrington?
So just a couple of points. Our capital budget is not just maintenance, correct? There are new amenities proposed and new opportunities for the community. That's one thing I wanted to point out. Additionally, I wanted to point out a big priority of the district that this board has decided to continue to pursue is a potential project at Oakton, which likely, as we've had conversations, would center around a referendum as well to pay for it. So I just wanted to put those two things out as context for when we're looking at this year, 2020 budget. When we talk about things like maintenance, this capital projects I see before me aren't just only maintenance. And then also that we have decided previously as a priority of Oakton. And so that in context of increasing a levy here versus, another referendum to increase taxpayer base.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
I am concerned. I have some other thoughts, but I want to get this one out first. I have a concern about the amount of new construction coming on because I don't see it. I mean, we've had new construction come on. There have been developments here and developments there, townhouses going up here, there. What I see now is a bunch of for sale signs that kind of tend to stay there for a while. And what is the dollar amount that we've got in there that we're figuring is new construction coming
So
on?
we've been, the last several years, we've estimated 14 million of EAV. I'm not saying it right. 14. Well, I'm getting my zeros right or not. 14 million of EAV, which translates to a dollar amount. Last year, I think the actual amount of new construction was 13 point something million, so we were pretty close. And I think it was 12.8 the year before, or maybe, something like that. So, it's a lot of times it's hard to, tell when you see new construction versus when it actually hits the tax roll. Is a little tricky, but I'm comfortable with that estimate. It seems like it's, we've been pretty close over the last couple of years, and I don't know, I see a couple of new multifamily dwellings going up around nearby. Not that they'll be on the rolls for next year, but I mean, I seem to see a mix of for sale, tearing down things and building new. So, I mean, it seems like it's been fairly stable, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
To clarify the discussion that we had before the meeting started here, if there were a substantial shortfall from what that estimate is, it would knock our levy down and we would have to reduce our capital budget. Is that correct? We wouldn't have those funds. We would not be able to get that money. That's not true?
That's not correct. That's the darndest thing about local government law. When you ask for your budget amount, the cap restricts the amount you get.
The dollar
And-
amount.
And that's spread across whatever EAV you have. So if you go from 100 million to now 101.8 million, whether the EAV is expanded by 14 million or less, you still get your 101.8 million. It's just spread across a lower amount of people who pay a higher rate. What you're going to get a check from the county for is what is capped. It doesn't really translate to the individual property owners, except at the end, we can look at a rate.
Right, but we're talking about levying up to the cap, are we not?
Right.
Yeah, so again, the county will go out and get you $101.8 million. If your tax base is, say, $1 billion, that's one thing. If it went up by 14 million, obviously everybody pays a little less to accumulate your 101.8. Whereas if the EAV shrinks, everybody has to pay more to give you your 101.8. But at the end of the day, you get your 101.8.
I see.
Thank you. Any other commissioner comments?
I guess I have a question that you've probably answered before a million times. But when Commissioner Leduc asked you, Sandra, about the negative impact of not increasing the levy by 1.9, you threw it out 1.5% on subsequent years, and I don't quite understand where that comes from. And I know that's very basic stuff, but give me a break that I'm kind of new. So
So what I'm suggesting is that that $100,000, if we were next year going to apply the next year's CPI increase to that amount, dollars that we would have is the 101,000 from this year, and then the following year we'd have 101,000 times.
whatever that number would be, and you threw out 1.5.
I used an estimate of 1.5 because it was 1.9 this year. It was 1.7. It's been 0.8. It's been 2.3. To me, a conservative estimate of the CPI going forward is 1.5%. So that's what I used to calculate what would we be foregoing if we did not take this year.
But that's assuming we would vote on the 1.5 next year, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
No.
No? No, I'm not. So
No.
that's where I want clarification.
That
So
automatically stays at that level.
Right. It doesn't come back down.
Right. So taxpayers are
Oh,
maintaining
I
that
see
level.
what you're saying.
no, yeah, I think I do get that part. That once we've done this, then this is the amount of money that we're getting, and then we would then Senator is saying that we might ask for another 1.5 on top of that, and that's 1.5 of a larger number. So it's in fact a larger number. Okay,
Right.
and that's and
Whenever
that's
we do that.
whenever we
This
do
year
that.
or
It's all
next
right.
year, the
Exactly.
year after, the year after.
Right. Okay. So that
Counts.
I just didn't. There's so many weird things going on with the number and where the pool of money comes from that I wasn't sure where the 1.5 came from. But basically, that 1.5 was a projected CPI thing to increase that we would vote on, like we're talking about today, only
So,
next year or
yes.
the year after, whenever that is.
So, I mean, likely going forward, unless we find a way that, or it happens that the market is such that wages are going down, that we're having ways to cut our expenses. When our expenses are growing by inflation, I'm going to be recommending that we increase our revenue by the commensurate inflation. So the projection, it takes that into account.
Commissioner Leach?
Last clarification, and I appreciate Mr. Price's advice and counsel for what it is.
Free.
Free. I love it. Best.
That's the best, right?
Yeah, but part of the clarification was needed in part because now I remember why. District 64 did a tentative levy on October 28th of 4.87%. So that's where my head was. And they went right at this concept of trying to grab more of the new construction as allowed under what they said is the property tax extension limitation law. So the point being is that's where my head was. And that's why I was asking that, is this, what are our options around this versus future years? So thank you.
All right.
Can I get some direction?
Cindy, I'll start with you.
Well, I think especially with minimum wage coming up, looking at some of our older facilities, we need to make sure that we're keeping up with inflation to keep on top of our facilities and that we're positioning ourselves to pay minimum wage for the, 80% of our staff that are impacted. So, yes.
Commissioner Harrington?
Quite honestly, I think that we have to take a really good look at some of these new projects that we're looking to invest in with some of these dollars to see if there's areas that maybe we're just a not now because we're focusing on maintenance of our facilities to the tune of that $103,000. So I would be a no.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Leach?
I would be a no.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
So I'm somewhat conflicted. I'm going to come around to this. I'm going to be a yes, but here's why. So I'm painfully aware of what the school district is doing and what their justification is, and it's that, and so I'm always underwhelmed with this. Well, if you don't get it now, you're going to lose it forever, and you have to do this, and yada 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 yada. And that's why people are getting property taxed out of their homes, and it's why you see all these for sale signs, and the houses aren't moving, and I get all that. So, so I have a lot of sympathy for what we do with taxes. I voted no the last 2 years, or from the first 2 years I've been on this board. However, our taxpayers, the majority of our taxpayers, somehow see fit to continually vote and elect for people in the General Assembly that pass legislation to pander for votes, and it sounds good, and it's terrible policy, and it has all kinds of unintended consequences, one of which we're dealing with right now with this minimum wage thing. And quite frankly, I think that what you presented in terms of your $900,000 over the 5 years, it's going to be even worse because there is going to be compression. I don't see how there can't be compression. I think this whole thing with minimum wage, see, I happen to say, if you're in favor of the minimum wage, you hate seniors, because what I say is it's highly inflationary. If you're going to raise, it's going to raise everybody up. It's going to increase costs, and people that live on a fixed income like I am are going to suffer. So, however, we are faced with this issue, and believe it or not, the money doesn't fall out of trees. It has to be paid for. And so I think we need to do this, and I'm a yes.
All right. And, I am not a fan of tax raises. It hurts to say yes to one, but I think this one, when you look at the amount and you think about all the various things we need to maintain, I would rather have smaller smaller levies and not find ourselves in a position where more and more things start falling apart, and then we're looking at bigger dollar values and bigger referendums. So I vote yes. Commissioner Coyne?
The argument that you come back with the CPI request in periods where job growth is strong and whatnot that you said before, that's compelling argument. But an equally compelling argument is that it is possible that we're going to go back to the taxpayers to pay even more money in the not too distant future, and that I think there are some things on this budget, some capital expenditures and other expenditures that might be able to be reduced to get us close to making that 103,000 really not that big of a deal. So I'm voting no.
For 1 year.
Right, for 1 year. We can come back next year and decide what we want to
But
do.
you're taking it away from every year. You're not just taking away from next year, you're taking away from every year going forward.
Well, kind of. I mean, I understand that argument that, this is that you get the percentage of a higher number compound interest sort of effect, and that's great. That, of course, does require us to vote for yet another increase in the future. Well, if you're saying that, yes, you're going to get, we don't get 1.9% every year, we'd have to come back and vote for the 1.
We get the 103 every year.
Correct.
Every year.
Right.
If you say yes today.
Right. Right. Or another way to say it is we take $103,000 from the taxpayers in Park Ridge for every year.
To upkeep our facilities.
I appreciate that, and I think that like I said, there's compelling arguments on both sides, and I was undecided on this until we walked into the room and I heard both sides, and I think there are definite reasons that people should vote yes, but there's also definite reasons why I think people should vote no, and I'm falling on that side right now. So I just think that there are some things that we can do within the budget without the 1.9%, and sort of preserve the integrity of the integrity isn't the right word. You can kind of hold off increasing taxpayers' expenditure until we do the referendum, and from nothing else than a marketing point of view, I think it looks good that we come back and say, look, we did not take this increase now, but we are going to ask you to do this because we want to rebuild this beautiful park over here on Oakton Street. Maybe I'm, mixing apples and oranges, but that's the kind of my take on it right now.
Throw something in before the vote is completely taken. I just want to point out to the commissioners some of our challenges with the things that you're looking at, because we haven't discussed those capital items yet. A lot of those things will just be deferring. Some, the landscaping, for example, sure, we can do without that, right? That would be one thing I'd take it.
We've done $250,000 on landscaping at Centennial, and now we're talking about $100,000 of taxpayer dollars. So,
But we're being asked to, we get complaints, we're being asked to provide to a certain standard that people expect.
it comes down to a difference of words. If we are not, as a board, debating not upkeeping our facilities and not moving forward with maintenance, this budget sans CPI increase can do that. What we're talking about is, can we as a district continue to have all of these new amenities and new projects like pickleball court, like planning for a new playground, and that's the policy decision the board's making. It is not whether or not we maintain our facilities, because we can do that within our budget. It is these new things. So I just want to clarify those words, because I think there's a distinction in that. And if you do not vote for the increase in CPI, it is not a vote for not maintaining facilities the way we should.
Okay, but a new playground is replacing an old playground. It's not a new thing. It's replacing something that's old.
I know a district right now that's in a challenge because they haven't replaced playgrounds in 20 years, right?
Sure.
I would say 9 years ago, we came in here, we weren't passing bond, the district was not passing bond issues to go towards capital, which I commend this board for doing, right? Because eventually the district will pay. If you don't I'm not talking about new projects, right? I'm talking about the maintaining and the things that we haven't talked about yet that, we're going to tell you the staff, that's just deferring it, the landscaping, which is an example of, we cannot do it and we can have bare areas, but we will hear complaints, and the board just needs to be ready for those kind of things, that we're not up to the standard that you and the community is asking us to be at, and we're fine with that. That's a decision that the board, of course, can make, and we're okay with. But the things that we're deferring, and there's a lot on those lists, landscaping not being one of them, we're just pushing to another year. And that's what got this district in trouble, when they weren't taking the bond issues to new capital. That's all I wanted to add in there.
Maybe. there are some sizable projects that this district has undertaken over the
Yes.
last 10 years.
Because they, they didn't do them, right, within, for several years. I mean, the
Maybe,
pump-
maybe not. We also acquired this piece of property.
Right.
There are
Oh,
huge
that's-
strides.
That's
this
like
dis-
different, right? I
Sure.
put that in a different bucket.
But we have to
right?
maintain this property now, right? So there
Right.
are huge strides that the district has made over the past 10 years. New pool at facility,
Absolutely.
this park. We're focusing on an Oakton because we need to redo that facility. And yet now we're saying we're also going to increase taxpayers' levy by 1.9%. And we're going to come back to you again for these larger referendum projects. Those are big asks. And I just go back to, again, maintenance is one thing, new amenities is another.
Sure.
And they are both equally,
Right.
something the board needs to consider because we do have a very expectant community clientele.
Yeah, we're fine either way. Just so you know, some of the consequences.
Commissioner Tunnel? All right.
Okay, so I am hearing direction to reduce the revenue by that CPI amount of $103,030. Any other comments or direction on the tax levy proposal?
Yeah, I just want to point out the irony of going to referendum on a facility that has huge maintenance needs and was not, in my opinion, maintained. And now we're going to referendum. I know it has updating needs, etc. But the thing falling down over the top, everything happening at South Park. And I'm one of the people that's complaining about the landscaping. There are people that care about that kind of stuff. There are people that complain to me about that kind of stuff. Terry says, I can only do what I can only do. So, building something nice and beautiful should not take precedence over getting the things done, the blocking and tackling that we are responsible for every year.
I have a question. So when we jump into the weeds on the rest of the budget and we find some things that we may want to carve out of it because now we're $103,000 less, right? We can come back with we could come back with something less than 1.9 at the end of that discussion, correct?
Oh, so you're saying like a compromise, like a lower levy?
Right. I mean, I just want to make sure that so if we get in here and we say, oh no, we don't need 103,000, but it would be really helpful to have 50,000. We're not locked in by base. I mean, I'm not saying that I would change my opinion necessarily. I just want to know what my options are. Again, I'm going to claim I'm young and new. Well, not young.
Yeah, in my opinion, I don't know if it's a point of order, but yes, I believe we could go back to it. I'm looking for direction, so yeah.
So I guess maybe then it'd be helpful to look at what we actually would have to talk about cutting for the capital projects.
So we did, again, have some items raised by some commissioners, and if anyone wants to raise any additional ones, that would be appropriate within this discussion as well. So back to the handout that we provided for tonight, the 2020 proposed budget items identified for board discussion under capital projects. The first one is an increase. Consideration, and this was raised by two different commissioners to add, and I think it came up for discussion at one of our meetings, to add a match to the Friends of the Park Foundation amount raised to finish the outdoor classroom sooner rather than waiting for additional fundraising.
Commissioner Leach?
Yeah, I was one of the commissioners that raised this. So here's where I feel is our jobs, since we all represent parts of the district, right? We're not from wards, we're not from different alderman districts. We're looking at it, we're all at large. What I look at this as a great concept, something that was already taken upon by the foundation and led to add an expense to add additional classroom opportunities for, I think, mainly youth, that is in an area that we're going to drive revenue. So one of the things I want to stress back to this whole concept and some of the things we're going to get into is, again, it's about priorities. You know, I will always be for low or no taxes. That's just where my priorities are, just as I respect others that want a lot of landscaping in parking lots. What I would like in this case is when we tie expenses back to programming, I'm in favor of that. What I hadn't heard in the previous meetings, to your reference, is how we're going to make up this fundraising gap that that group is at. I thought they were right 50% or so.
And it was a lot of fun.
Nice.
Bring us up to about 27,000.
Right.
We're looking at next year how much we can raise. I think conservatively about 10,000 when you do the bike sale, the grilling, and the trivia event again.
So the reason I added this, and maybe it's an up to versus 25,000, is I think the concern was raised in one of those meetings, Sandra, that there were children that had actually expressed, when am I going to get this outdoor classroom? Right? So something as successful as it is, why don't we just make this happen? The fact that wasn't in the capital request budget is a question I have for staff, because you probably have a great reason why. But I looked at it as kind of an easy thing to do and do it now in a great part of our programming. That's my 2 cents.
My thought was to ask you next year at this time.
Okay.
But I'm
Right
happy
answer.
to take it now.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're all clear that this is a new amenity. And then I think Terry had some concerns about the timing, but otherwise, we can make this ad if that's the board's direction.
Did you have anything else you wanted to say? The only thing that I just wanted to bring up, and it was just to the point of getting this out as soon as we can. We certainly have that same goal. Some of the resources to complete this project are reliant on donated services, and so I won't have as much, I guess, strength over when and how that timeline works out. So, and it's also a tight time frame. If we're moving forward with this starting after the first of the year, it won't likely be ready in the springtime. It might be the fall. It might be after the fall, so it might not make next year's classes. It might be ready for spring of 2021. It was just a point that was brought up of we'd like to get this and see it for the next year group of kids. And so I just wanted to point out that I'm not 100% confident that that can happen, but we will certainly work with everything we can to get that to happen. So that's all.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
I have a couple questions on this. Why, this has been on the list since I came on the board. Why did we choose to fund it in this manner to begin with? Why wasn't this part of a capital plan?
I think, as Sandra said, it was a new amenity that if we were to put it on prioritization of our needs and the things that we heard from the board that they needed or they wanted to see in terms of new items, that didn't fall anywhere in there. So it was a nice to have, and that's why we thought it was a good thing for the foundation to fundraise for.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
We thought that we had identified someone we thought would play a lead role in getting the money for that, and it didn't work out. So we thought we would get a sizable portion of that money up front. So that's why it's taking us so long.
Yeah, we started the fundraising in June of 2018, so we're just at about a year and a half.
Seems longer than that.
It does feel
does seem
longer than that.
It does.
Yeah.
My other question is for you, Commissioner Harrington. You and I had a discussion, and you made some comments about this, and so actually I'm kind of surprised to see this one pop up on the list, and I'm wondering where you are in your thinking on that.
Well, I had a question actually, because we were looking at kind of the same demographic that we're trying to provide a new amenity for, right? When we talk about the leisure center preschool playground equipment for $17,000, can we talk about that, the use of that, and if those dollars would rather be spent on the nature classroom instead? Where's the need? Where's the demand? Which one would garner more revenue
That's
programmatically?
more of an
Kind of
April
talking about the
question.
same.
It's the same age group, but I
yeah.
think it's different
I
programs.
know that.
but-
Yeah.
It is different programs. This one has been on the docket for several years now, and it's something we continue to defer. If you drive down, if you're the west side of the building, it's half playground equipment, half like Little Tykes. So the Little Tykes is not necessarily what we would prefer to have out there and not necessarily up to code for our preschool program. And because of funding at that time, we only did half of it. So this is, I think, year 2 or 3 of trying to complete that project, and same type of thing. It's part of our preschool program, one of our revenue producing programs. But when we get down to this portion of the conversation, it's something that where it's like, okay, yes, we can defer that another year.
The newer playground that's fenced in to the south of our preschool. What ages does that service then?
It's the 3 to 4 year old preschool. So the other
This
one
is
is
2 to
the 2. So they go outside and either go to go outside and go to that
south side, right.
one. Normally they go in the enclosed area, but this one they don't even have to leave and go outside in the hallway and exit and go around to that entrance because it's
And April, when you think that
enclosed
it's,
area.
yeah, when you think that's a pretty tough call on revenue, I mean, because they're not going to bring in revenue, either of them. And they're both, they're raising the quality of the preschools, right? One's nature preschool, one's regular, right? So
Both are
I think it's a tough call to answer that one about the revenue.
they're both revenue producing programs for the preschool area. Any other commissioners?
I mean, I know having a recent, graduate of both programs, like both programs are great, but I think that we are really lucky to have a nature preschool program because that's not something every community has. And I think continuing to improve that would really be something that would benefit the specialness of the Park Ridge program. Any other thoughts?
So, am I hearing consensus that yes, we want to add this amount to match, increase the capital budget by 25,000?
I just want to ask, Margaret's number plus 25 doesn't equal what the budget is. Or is that,
Did you count the
2021?
10,000?
You're including 10,000 next year?
Yeah, 10,000 next year.
Yeah, count on 10,000 more for next year. From us.
Is that it?
Because the bike sale always makes about 4. The grilling's been doing 2. Trivia.
Yeah,
be
okay.
Another 4. So we could easily raise
It's 25.
That's fine.
it to 25,000.
All right. So I guess obviously, I don't know how into the weeds we want to get on every single item, but I think just like a general, are people in favor of the 25,000 for the outdoor classroom?
I am with swapping out the 2-year-old preschool equipment since 3 years ago we did, sounds like half of it.
All right. Anybody else?
So you're, okay, I got you.
That's just my thought process.
So defer or cut?
A cut for now. I mean, it's kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah. Well, it was cut last year and it came up
It
again.
came back
so-
again, yeah.
Well, I think we intended to defer,
I mean, it would be helpful to know because we do those projections. So if, I mean, and that's part of, what we're talking about here. I think staff is still recommending that we get rid of the little Tykes equipment. If we're saying no, if the board is saying, no, we don't want to do that. I mean, I guess since it's been brought up, I would want to have consensus from everyone on that topic as well. So I know in the projections, is this cut now or are we putting it out next year, the year after?
Well, I'd like to make a suggestion. If we're going to go through all 18 of these items here, in fact, there's even more than that, 23, we're going to be here all night. suppose we can blow through them to kind of take the temperature, but it seems to me the charge here is that we got to find $100,000 or something like that, or maybe less, according to Commissioner Coyne. I don't know. I don't know how we want to approach that, but do we really want to go through every single one of these items? And we're going to be here till 2 in the morning.
So I'm happy to take that on. I absolutely think we should. It's one of our top 3 responsibilities. I also believe I've listened patiently into some long nights, but enjoyed the pizza for the presentations over the last couple of months. So I think this is absolutely part of our charge, and I don't think it's that hard to consider. Do you want to have this or not have this? And if you want to cut something or replace it, that's also an easy decision too. But I absolutely believe, back to I think a point that was raised earlier by a commissioner, if there are suggestions that we're not fulfilling capital needs or adding programs or maintenance capex or whatever other term you want to use, let's talk through it. But in this case, if we're trying to raise money out in the public for an outdoor classroom for $25,000, and I'm given an option of fixing a steering wheel problem on a Ford Ranger, it's a no-brainer. I'm always going to do this. But that we're not to that because that's 20 points down. So that's what I would say. So in fairness and in respect to all commissioners' opinions, I appreciate the process and I appreciate the opportunity. And I wasn't privy to every other conversation that commissioners have had on this topic.
I'm the one who suggested it, and given that we don't have the money, I'm going to suggest we don't do it. It was a nice to have. And I believe in the past that we've asked staff to go back and prioritize the reductions.
Just for the record, I'm in favor of the outdoor. I really think it's an important need for the community.
So 2-2.
Any other comments? Maybe it would make sense if we could look at the things that staff has already identified as ones that we could potentially mark off. Maybe go through those a little faster, since we know we kind of have in mind at least some idea of what the reduction needs to be.
Let me do a point of clarification again. There's no need for reduction. You're in a cash surplus of $300 and some thousand, reducing it down to $200,000. So just be clear with the mathematics. Like, it doesn't have to be reduced.
That's correct.
Thank
That's
you.
correct.
All right, but if there were areas, like for instance, point 2, where the staff, had recommended using banners for now and putting off the, $26,500 and for the South Park, if that's something that would make sense so that we still preserve more of the margin on what can be move forward and give ourselves a little more leeway.
So I guess if I could, we outlined the items that were raised and staff's comments related to those items. When we went through and identified the capital list, we have not in our comments said, I think maybe there was one where we could come with a compromise, Terry suggested. We haven't said, yes, great idea to cut this for any of
Oh,
these,
no, I'm sorry.
right?
I don't want to give that impression. What I'm saying, though, is ones that might be.
So that's, I guess, kind of, we felt it would be helpful to get the board's feedback if there was consensus on things that everyone wanted cut or not. I think Terry or Gail, did we come up with a potential list of what our priorities would be? I don't know if we quite got there.
We were answering all the questions that were brought up, I think, is
where we focused on at this time. So we don't at this time have a priority recommendation of cuts. So I was prepared to kind of go through each list and find out if there was agreement on any of them. But I'm happy to not and say yes. We'll just reduce our surplus by that amount, and understand that the board understands the implications and the projections going forward. Um, we're happy, I think, to approach it however the board would like us to.
I mean, does anybody else have any thoughts? Like, should we just try to go through them all? Or?
Is there one that you received a lot of questions on from a majority of commissioners, like the main park playground planning, which is a significant amount of money, knowing that we're hitting up against, useful life, and that's something we're planning for. Does that priority need to be shifted while we do priorities like pickleball and Hinckley? And, so from a board perspective, can that wait another year or two while we've got Hinckley, Woodland, and Oakton on the horizon?
So I would say that I think, heard from two commissioners, and where there were overlap was the playground planning, right? Or was it Hinckley planning? Was one of the plannings.
I'd have to look it up.
I think it was the playground planning and the landscaping. I think those were the ones that were raised by both of those commissioners. We didn't get any other feedback.
We just, in my opinion, we just redid Main Park with luckily a very nice grant, right? And there was a lot of work put in there, new rooms added on. We're generating some additional revenue there. We just got another grant finally released on Wildwood. So we've really updated we are in the process of updating that. It seems to me we've hit a lot of Main Park over the last few years. Now we're focused on Woodland, then Hinckley and Oakton kind of in the mix. So for me, foregoing the $100,000 planning process for the main park playground is an area where I would consider kind of moving that priority to another year.
So the only background I would give to that is that the reason that we had prioritized that Hinckley Park, the main park playground in that time frame was one, because of its age, also because of its high usage. I think that's probably one of our more important playground areas in town. But also the timing of it was to try to line up with a future grant cycle. And so, we just went in for the grants for Woodland again this year. We were just down this last week. We anticipate doing and planning the Hinckley property so that we could apply for the OSLAD grant next year, which is part of the reason why, and not that we're talking about that, but part of the reason why I'm asking for those amounts of dollars so that we can kind of get ahead of that game and ahead of the planning and making these changes to the parks and upgrades, with the idea that the following year, the future year, would then put us in line for Main Park. So the idea was just to have the planning dollars and the resources available to us now to make sure that we have proper engagement of the community, have a long runway of discussion before we get to that, because we've been kind of as the grants kind of dried up a little bit, and they started to become available, it's been, whoa, hang on, let's catch up to this. And it's become a real struggle for us, but we don't want to miss those opportunities for our community. And so that's been what we're trying to do, is to try to get ahead of it. So while it does seem a little front loaded, and maybe it is, and maybe it's okay for us to miss a grant cycle, that's just kind of the approach that we've taken based on the feedback, based on our needs, all the other things. So.
Yeah, and I think I value that kind of strategic thinking and planning, because I know exactly what you're talking about now that there seems to be some grants out there for us to take advantage of.
Right.
But as a district and priorities, we got a whole lot right now, and we're working on them, and we're doing a really good job of kind of moving the district forward. As you were talking, I kind of thought in my mind, hey, wait, what about land acquisition too? And there's funds here. So we're trying to bite off a lot of new stuff and a lot of projects. And so we're doing a good job, and I'm going to pat ourselves on the back. We just might be one project too many right now. And so, what project is that?
Main
Yeah.
Park, we talked about that.
What project is that?
We could push it back.
Right.
You know, not cut,
No.
but defer.
Yeah.
I think.
Right.
We're like one project too heavy according to our
Put your
budget.
$100,000.
And that just
Meeting very quickly.
right.
Exactly.
Well,
All
and
resolutions.
and I think that's fine, and I'm very comfortable with doing that. I want to make sure that it's open in the discussion that when that 2021 grant cycle comes around, I'm not going to have a project to apply. So we're going to be looking at that $400,000 OSLAD project coming up and that potential for a grant, and the questions are going to come in about, well, what are we planning on doing? And I'm going to say I don't have anything. I haven't
Does
had
that
any
fit into one of our
resources.
other priority buckets?
It could, and we could relook at that, but it's still, if it does, it'll require some level of planning dollars somewhere for something. And so, like I said, we're looking at, Hinckley, and so I think we'll just be, if we're not taking this step to kind of plan two of them simultaneous, it's going to put us a little bit behind it. It'll keep us on that trying to catch up round. And so that's okay. We spent a lot of time kind of looking at some of our playgrounds. We looked at Hinckley when we tried to prioritize, was Main Park better more than Hinckley? And, based on some of the feedback we heard from the board about how we've been approaching projects and the way we looked at Woodland to do that more holistically, we felt like Hinckley made sense. But even right now with our plan for Hinckley right next year, it's got a relatively old playground that we're not even planning for in that project, just because of we've always looked at these playgrounds, their life expectancy, and they've always been on this different track. And so I just will continue to fall on that, I think, and not upgrading those. So I mean, we can always look at it, but I won't be able to feel more comfortable and confident that I have something lined up right now, because we took a pretty good look at that. So
I'd also like to throw in that Main Park is so heavily used. That's the only playground I actually get customer comments on about the condition. So we just got another one on Friday. So for the last probably 3 years, there's been sort of a trend in customer comments about the condition of Main Park's playground.
I would just want to add that in addition to maybe we wouldn't have grant money available for when we are ready to do that project. Of course, if we're deferring, we're looking at cost increases. But then when Terry was talking about it, I was thinking about our capital asset replacement plan, and Terry and his staff has done a lot of work on looking at playgrounds and which ones are identified for replacement when. And I don't know if this makes sense for you to think about, or if you can, just if we're now deferring this, how does that implicate the rest of our playground replacement schedule as well?
it would just push everything back a year. Would be my either that, or we'd have
Your
to
recommendation, or
or
would
we'd
you
have
bring
to double
something?
up.
Yeah. Okay.
Because just off my head, I know that we were looking at Main Park and then South Park were the next two. Main Park being a larger playground, having more cost. South Park still being an important and somewhat community-centered playground, but thinking about that more in size and scale and scope, I guess probably to what we just did at Northeast. So it would just push that off unless we said in a year, oh, never mind, we're going to double up and do all sorts of playgrounds and 1.5 million in playgrounds at two different locations. And I don't know that that's going to happen, but so just continue to push that down the road a little bit, which is a decision that we can do. That's
And I guess for my fellow, commissioners, it's a question of then do we defer a year on Hinckley? I don't believe so. Do we defer a year on, there's only so much money in the pot. And even with the $100,000 of CBI, there's, only so much money in the pot. And we're faced with kind of that board policy decision on priority setting. Clearly, we've already said Oakton is a priority. Now we're in various stages. Now it's just kind of figuring out on our portfolio, which we might just not be able to work on next year. I mean, is land acquisition, clearly that's been a board priority. That's been we've spent a lot of time discussing that. That too could be in varying stages of implementation. Is that an area where for 2020. That's another one that's, kind of been identified. Bless you.
Would it help if we put that priority list back up on the screen? that you
Maybe,
guys gave
maybe,
us?
yeah.
Do we have that
Sure.
from your presentation?
It was in the capital presentation.
Yeah,
right?
that was our, that seems like.
The
Forever ago.
the one that was in the presentation, or the notes from our meeting?
No, you had.
I
some-
generalized it
yeah,
in the.
Generalized it.
Was it at the beginning?
Yep.
And I think it's always good for us to remind ourselves of what the community survey kind of suggested back to us, walking trails, shelters, and all those things again, because
That's
now we're
right.
facing some hard, decisions.
Yeah, the trails and the shelters and the bathrooms.
Right.
We were addressing that with Woodland.
I know we are.
Addressing that with Hinkley,
Right.
right? So, just to give you some context there.
Right.
So,
There it is.
There it is.
And North Park Planning.
Slide just on its own. You get
So, ponds, we've got tennis court resurfacing in there.
Yep.
Shelters, we've got planning for shelters in there, and then Woodland, hopefully if we get that grant. Land acquisition, we all know where that's at.
Well, and you're doing the
We're getting
shelter.
a lot of these.
You're doing the shelter at Main Park, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
We're getting a
Right.
shelter in Main Park this year. Woodland, hopefully.
We're putting a new shelter, so it's in place of an existing shelter. So the new shelter is much bigger. Yes.
Usable
Definitely.
shelter. Yeah, we're adding to the quality of that
Right.
and the size.
Which makes sense, especially with all the kids in camp there in the summers.
Probably a huge add. We can't move the other one like we thought we were gonna be able to move, by the
No?
way. Because.
They're telling us no, but I'm not done with it yet. So.
Is it a city thing?
So I don't see playgrounds up there. Okay, I know we have a capital replacement plan for that, and they're high use, and we have a very family-friendly community. We have redone southwest in the recent 3 years.
Yep.
We've redone northeast, and we've redone Prospect. Sorry.
That's okay.
Oh, Prospect and
And-
Northeast.
Yeah.
And Centennial within the last 5 years. So that's
Yeah.
5 playgrounds in the past 5 years. I'm pretty proud of that.
Yeah.
Not saying that we don't have more room to go, just putting that out there.
We're a victim also of our own success there too, because everybody sees these
Yes.
neighborhoods getting new playground. When am I getting mine?
Right,
Right.
right.
So that comes with that, right?
Yeah, and we have just going to pull it up. We have 13 or 14 playgrounds. Typical life expectancy replacement on playgrounds is in the neighborhood of 13 to 20 years, depending on who you talk to. Some places are more aggressive than others, but I kind of looked at ours initially when I got here. It wasn't really planned out at all. I made the assertion that we should be trying to replace one about every year to get us on, especially because we were behind and hadn't replaced several in many years. And so, even when we laid out that initial plan last year, as we were going through capital planning, we saw that we were falling short on our capital needs. And so we started to stretch that out a little bit and a little bit more. And so it's just one of those areas. And, that's what we have, and that's what we have to work with. So we do have 15. Main Park was installed in 1993, and then South Park in 95, North Park in 94, also Rotary in 94, and then several others at 2000 and later. But so those are our oldest, but when you think of in terms of being in that 13, 15 to 20 year age, some of those are almost double that.
So I still don't understand where this is going. And I'm confused. I guess I'm not used to. Well, let me tell you what I am used to. So in the corporate world, the companies that I work for, there's a strategy that says we're going to invest every year, economics being considered, because sometimes you have to change it like we did in 2008, 2009. But we're going to invest X in our business. And then there's a strategic plan that kind of sits behind it so that you invest in the right priorities. And then, you kind of have a number, and then everybody comes up with their wish list. And then the powers that be say, no, we're not going to spend that much. And maybe we object to one or two of these items because they're not consistent with the strategy. But at the top level, they don't come up with a list of 24 items to say yay or nay to. The direction would be, no, we want to spend X dollars less. Here, Gail, take this back and you guys work on it. Here's a little bit of input from us, and then come back to us. So I would hope that that's how we're going to do this.
Only thing I would counter is I think the request for the last month or two was to come up with points to come back to discuss, because we didn't even discuss them. Right. So I'm finding it kind of apparent that we're not discussing points in a budget. I appreciate the staff's work towards the budget, and I'm not even questioning their priorities. I'm just saying there's things in here that I think is absolutely, as a board, elected to give direction to the staff to help set the priorities. In fact, I think I heard a commissioner once tell me that. So the only thing I would say is when you're looking at that, I just want to give some feedback to the staff relative to how we're spending very precious capital. And that is the ownership, where I would think in a corporate analogy is the board. The staff is just taking direction on these priorities. That's it. That's all it is. But I have no problem waiting and pausing and taking as much time we need to. But I do think we need to address things like the parking lot shrubs and things like that would need to be placed, whether it be at Centennial or at South Park, and really think that we need to spend $25,000 on perennials. And that's what I raised, I think, in Terry's presentation. So I think this is the avenue and the venue I was supposed to do it in. So I'll continue to say that. And I haven't even gotten to Jim Janik's bench.
That's the last thing.
But those are the things I thought I was doing, but I only get 3 things to do a year, and this is one of them.
There are a couple things we could just kind of continue to go point for point. Maybe we could also take the approach of going down the line. If there are certain things individual commissioners want to bring to attention, we could discuss those. How do people feel about that option? This is my first year in the treasurer role, so.
Jennifer, could
default
I suggest one other option, or
Yes,
one other option, not to confuse things, is to kind of take Commissioner O'Donnell's suggestion and find out if people want to come up with a dollar amount of capital and direct staff to figure out how to do it. We could go any of those ways.
I think Commissioner Leach is saying the fear is he's an elected commissioner to set priorities, and that if staff was given a directive to cut $100,000 on the budget, it may not align with what majority board priorities would be.
I think that's true.
It's kind of my fear.
Reiterating what I think I heard you say.
Maybe we can make this go a little quicker if we talk about each of these and talk about staff's responses to these. Sandra?
Sure. I was trying to do.
You guys agreeable to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think whatever we do, we pick one and we move forward because we don't want to
Correct.
waste 20 minutes discussing
number
how to do
2.
it.
100%.
So
We're on number 2.
Yeah, we're at number 2, which is an ad for to replace the South Park sign. Margaret had some information and had looked into replacement of the sign. Her estimate was that replacement would be $26,500 plus concrete, and a new pole, which she did not have cost estimates on, in order to replace that sign. And staff felt that it was not a priority for replacement, the type of sign that it was, and that it could be best addressed more economically via banners with ease of changing message, et cetera. And we weren't sure if the commissioner that raised that one wanted to give feedback about 15,000 versus her estimates, or
I would love to.
Are you the one raising all these, Rob?
Almost. And so on this one, it's real easy. I'm happy to withdraw this one. But with this connotation, one, it gives us an idea of what the cost is at 26,000, so 500. Thank you. The other thing is a resident of South Park. That was a very critical sign that most people down there recognized it, and there's messaging. So I don't think it's a banner replacement type of a position. And I was very clear with Ms. Mountcastle when it was replaced that I wanted to make sure that we retained that right to put a sign back there with the city. So I feel like every year they'll go past there, the more we're going to potentially risk bringing our good whomever attorneys involved here just to negotiate something that maybe we could already get just by coming back at it. But I get it. There's scarcity of capital. This isn't a high priority, but it is absolutely a want.
I just have a quick question. Was the original sign put in by National City Bank? Is that they were the sponsor, so they paid for that sign?
We don't really know. Do we know
Their name was on it.
Their name was on it.
So would you be open to sponsorships like of a local bank per se? Like if they were willing to put that up, would you guys?
I don't know if that's allowed though by the sign ordinance because you can't advertise for a business that doesn't exist on that property was my understanding. Right. So I think you'd have to work through the nuance of the sign ordinance.
Yeah, the other thing is that I hear what you're saying, Rob, right? Because it was a fixture, but those signs are really obsolete and they're very labor intensive, putting those letters up on those signs.
I don't mean that tight.
Oh, okay. That's not the electronics.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I just want it on your radar. The reason I put it on the list was it just is a lot.
Electronic sign is like 60-some thousand.
Right. And we could look at the super cool electronic sign that they have at Main South.
Oh yeah.
Oh, wait a second. They don't have them at Main South because the city says you can't.
I'm hearing.
April was reminding me that the reason why we have the quotes at the ready is because it was on one of our original lists as something that we thought was we should look into, but we did cut it back before bringing our recommended list to the board. So just to highlight that it is part of the process. Okay. So the next one is the Centennial Park Complex signs. Wasn't clear on whether the board just wanted to discuss whether this was a priority or not. We just wanted to reiterate what staff's thought process was here, that when the facilities were renamed after the addition of the new aquatic facility, we installed temporary signs with the intent of pursuing a larger complex sign, and there was some research done on electronic sign and the ordinance, everything we just talked about. And this year's plan was developed to greatly increase visibility because people are confused which building is where, and consistency with the district-wide signs.
On the corner. It's like a
Yeah,
identification sign. So we're not talking about replacing the one that the board said they don't want to replace, the letter one, right? This would just be a park identification sign like the rest of our parks. You know, just like the wood ones, the not expensive ones. And then in front of like the Centennial Activity Center, we just put, if you really look at that, we put a board up there just temporarily. It's kind of, it's. Yeah. Piece of plastic.
Okay.
And then the ones we added in front of the buildings at Centennial Activity Center and Centennial Fitness Center, they're about this big in the landscape. I got those for $80 a piece, and we didn't even put them in concrete because we thought they were temporary.
Right, so this is not the sign, we're not saying replace the sign that has the letters. We won't do anything with that till that thing goes, right? Which hopefully it won't, but these are different signs we're talking about there. Is there any objection to that?
Great. Thank you. The next one was the Main Park Leisure Center window treatment replacements. So we have a little more context here that when the Main Park facility was renovated, the decision was made not to replace that. I think because of some of the reconfiguration, the old treatments no longer fit. The new rooms, the windows were all new. But there historically were in the old window treatments there. So since the renovation, we've identified safety security issues with the office and AV equipment in plain view. Employees work at night and, they're in a fishbowl and people bang on the windows. The programming area also comfort is a concern with the glare and sun in the new, nice new big programming rooms. The budget covers 18 windows in total, 5 in the offices, 6 in the park room, 7 in the ridge room. So the board wants to discuss that one because that's come up a couple times.
No objection by me.
The range lighting replacement, there was some discussion at a prior board meeting, and this was brought up. We did a follow-up response with some pictures and the data on, find it here.
Page 11 of the capital response plan is a picture.
Thank you, Terry. And there's also
Revenue on page 10.
Revenue information there.
I had raised that issue based on the photograph, and after I reviewed the financials and the budget, I'm okay with this.
Commissioner Leach?
Same here.
Because you raised it again.
It helps the picture. I always said the picture would tell you 1,000 words.
Yes.
So I'm fine with it. Perfect.
Okay. Now we come to the landscaping suggestion to reduce the amount using our staff. Our response was that the amount we had budgeted was to completed by our staff. Terry suggested, we could come back. We could cut back on that. There were pictures in the capital presentation slideshow, and again, this is really if the board directs us to make these reductions. Is this a cut or a deferral? Is what I would want to know, because is this going to keep coming up? Or are we comfortable having these bare areas?
I think we've talked already a bit about the landscaping, and I've already got some sense on where some of the board is on this. I just wanted for background, we had feedback, not only just from Commissioner Grau about landscaping, but we've had it from a number of residents as we're out in the parks doing community park meetings, and sometimes were giving us a hard time about not having any plants or flowers around, even just the park signs and some of the more remote parks, and just in other areas that the parks just didn't look as nice as they should. I used to hear about it from some people over at live near Cumberland. And so this is an area that I've heard from a lot of different people over many years that I've been here. We've made gradual different changes and works towards improvement. At some point, everything was low grow, green sumac everywhere. It was not wonderful. Some of my staff at the time tore most of it out. We started doing thousands and thousands of annuals, which was very labor intensive. We couldn't keep up with, and we started to transition into perennials. And so over time, that was kind of the ongoing direction was, here's how we're going to manage these spaces more financially and environmentally responsibly by using perennials. When we fill the areas with the landscaping, with the perennials, we're shading out potential for weeds, reducing the amount of time that staff has to go back and manage those areas, and also beautifying our parks and our facilities at the same time. So it was a direction that we took and we understood, and actually made its way into our strategic plan over the last few years, with the goal of putting in additional perennials at multiple different parks and facilities, and we've been successful in implementing that. And so we were just looking to continue that work and that look. If it is the priority of the board or we want to hold off on that for a while, then we're totally okay with that. We were just taking the guide from what we've been hearing and what we've gotten from response to continue down that path. So I just wanted to make sure that I gave that background on that.
Just so people know, the perennial it's a permanent solution. This will have an end when you get to all the parks. Not that some plants won't die or you need upgrading, but you're making an investment. It's like carpet, right? Your carpet's in, now you can live on it, live with it for a while, and some perennials can live forever.
Yeah, so my whole point on the math on this one was, if I take I thought the labor was contracted out. So if I think of $10,000 at South Park, and I had already mentioned, I've seen perennials at the front by the sign, and I think you had mentioned they might have been just planted a few years ago, or 5 or something like that. But the point is, if I take it divided by $50 a plant, I think if you go to Lurvy's, you're less than that, to be honest. You're 400 plants for South Park. So that's just where my head was. I just didn't think whether it's Centennial at 15,000 or 10,000. I think it's a lot of money to me to plant our own plants.
It is. It's not cheap, and we do have a lot of work to do there. And so I went and I just took some aerial measurements just to give some context. And so, like at South Park, for example, we're looking at about 3,500 square feet of space. And so when you divide this 10,000 by that, you're looking at a $3 a square foot. If you've got a gallon container, you're doing those every other foot or every foot or so. It starts to get there quite a bit, and those containers you pick up, $7 to $10 depending on what it is. So I think we've already kind of looked at it and taken a conservative approach. You can't look at it specifically on a square foot basis on all of these. For example, I'm going to skip a little bit here, but when you go to the northwest corner of Centennial, the staff understands that should be a little more dense and packed. We wanted to match the other side, and that was planted pretty nicely because we wanted to have a good impact right away. So the parking lot islands at Centennial, when I add all those up, that's about 5,300 square feet, or probably a little bit bigger than half of one of your yards. Not too different than like a Mary Q. Albertine. So when you start to think about that size of that as it adds up, at 15,000, that's about $3 a square foot. It's not a lot of money, and it still has other implications. Like for the example of the parking lot islands, there we're going to have to do a little bit of excavation to make sure that we're not over mounding that, so things start to trickle onto the parking lot. So we can defer it, reduce it. One of the options that we can look at is, well, we've only got so many dollars we're going to work with this year, and so we'll get done what we can, and we won't do the ones that we can't, or however we want to look at that. So we're completely open to this. I just think it kept up with what we were looking to accomplish in the parks, and that's why we proposed it.
So let me last point, I'll respond on this. I'm fine with it as you've described, Terry. I just think perennials are the best option. So I love the idea. When I was looking at it, I'm looking at context that I'm going to be a no vote on the levy, and there's going to be other higher priorities. So I would love for you to plant perennials all over the place. So just if costs afford it.
Well, I mean, this is one area where it'd be nice if we could look into partnerships with places like Lurvy's or Pesci's and see if, that's another way to reduce the cost. Because, yeah, I mean, I think aside from the aesthetic aspect, if it does end up leading to a long-term decrease in maintenance costs, then it actually over time could help, defray its own costs.
Yeah, and we're still committed to looking into those partnerships if we move forward with this. So.
Okay. So the next one was the play structure at Main Park. I guess we've discussed that already.
Did we get consensus on that?
I don't think so.
I'm with Commissioner Harrington. I just don't think it's a priority right now. It's an easy 100,000.
100.
of this discussion moot because of the conservative budget process that we undertake as a district. We always seem to have some dollars from deferred projects that come back over for capital. We have, at the end of the year, oh, look, our revenue is higher than we thought. So are we having some of these discussions when they may be a moot issue?
I think there's one item that you identified, right, that was already budgeted in 19, but otherwise.
Oh, no, in here, I think she's asking, am I gonna have project surpluses?
Yes.
And that
Sorry, I
we're-
don't know.
Oh,
revenue.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Well, I'm just asking, and I know we budget for a reason, and we're going through the strategic priorities, and that's what we're supposed to do, but wanting to know, just as we're painstakingly going through this process, kind of what you're thinking as far as year end, and if there will be a surplus in revenue than you had originally predicted, or if there are project surpluses that might be coming through. And that we could say, hey, if we have that, we'll put it towards Main Park. Something like that.
I think we moved everything over into the current year.
Capital, I don't anticipate any big, because there was a few that we'd already kind of looked at in going forward into some of the planning, like for Woodland, for example, we had identified, we're gonna have some savings here on the roofing project, and then we'll allocate that.
Plug it in.
And then I had that big change order for that, and so then I had to go find money somewhere else. And so I've been doing a lot of that kind of shifting on some various projects here and there. I don't anticipate any big savings on anything, so that's
2
my
years ago, it
answer.
was like 1.4 million in capital.
Yeah, well, I think there were some things that were budgeted that didn't get completed, and there'll be some of that, but that's not necessarily new money as much as it is just we didn't get around to spending it yet. So,
Right,
and-
it will be just, the expense will show up in the following year.
I couldn't speak to the revenues. I mean, from the operating side, I don't think we're anticipating anything more.
I think we're projecting about 100,000 more than what we had budgeted for operating at this point, but that was included in the capital projections that we looked at.
We hope we end up higher. Hope we have that problem. All right.
So far,
What else feel about Main Park?
I've heard two, I think defers a year is I think what the proposed was, or year or two, but
Yeah,
defer.
two people to defer Main Park.
The item on the list says reduce to 50. So are we reducing to 50 or are we taking off the entire 100?
So the cost of the planning is a function of what the value of the project is. So the reducing to 50 just means I'm going to have to reduce the cost of the playground overall. Might mean that we have less equipment. Maybe we don't have rubber surface at the playground, something like that. So
It's $1 million project.
Yeah.
So it's 100,000 in planning. So it's a percentage base.
Yep.
So I think if we would suggest defer it, not reduce it, right?
Correct.
If we're going to do anything.
that would be my suggestion.
Do we just want to defer that one?
Yes.
What is the
That's
staff,
three.
what is,
We have a lot to do in a lot of areas in the park district, and so it gets hard for us to look at and defer things that we know are needs and wants in our district always. And so I think we as a team go through this balancing act every single year, and it's always a challenge for us because there's varying degrees of needs, wants, and maintenance, everything else.
Kept us by.
Right. I think, for me, also with adding on the idea of the outdoor classroom, because it seems that was a discussion that we're going to be moving forward on. I think that project's going to end up being quite complicated overall. I think it's a dream on the outdoor classroom. It's a dream on a piece of paper that we use for fundraising. Making it happen is going to have its own set of challenges, and we'll get it there. I mean, staff has vetted it. No, the budget. I mean, staff vetted that. I trust staff's vetted that, but it's still, yeah.
So we're fine moving Main Park.
Fine moving Main Park, exactly.
Let's move on.
Thank you, Gail.
All right.
Great. Okay.
I
Then
think
we
we've talked about
we've
Centennial Park
about
landscape.
landscaping, right? The turf regrade at the aquatic center. and-
Well, hang on. I think maybe just for my understanding on the landscaping is that as long as it makes sense with our overall budget and what we have available, and it's not hurting us in other areas, to continue to do it, but be conscious with the budget. So if it makes sense, do it.
If not, hold off.
If not, hold off. Is that fair?
That's very fair.
Got that? I know it's not as crystal clear as you probably
That means I'm not making a change.
Right. That's fair. And that's what it hears. We're not making a change, but as I'm working through my
hope that we're
projects,
all
I need
clear
to
on
be
that,
conscious of it.
Which
so.
you always are.
Yes,
Yes.
I am.
I'll give this one to Terry to explain.
So this one, this is a really challenging project for us. We definitely need some contractors to help us out with some of the irrigation heads are going to have to get raised and lowered. This project is one that we would anticipate starting on the day the pool closes. It's going to be extremely labor intensive because we have tight spaces, small decks, small entrance areas. We can't get big equipment in there, so the whole project's going to have to get done with wheelbarrows and hand grading, and we just don't have the staff available to get it done in a time-efficient manner so we can get grass seed down and growing to get a full good grow season in before it has to overwinter and grow again in the spring. So this is one that we really don't feel like we have any room to move, and I would like to get this done sooner rather than later so we don't have an issue with someone twisting their ankle.
Can I ask a question? These are individual commissioners' issues. Is there more than one commissioner on any of these items?
Well, you didn't have a process to have more consensus. You never had an open meeting, so there couldn't be collaboration. That's why we have an open
No.
meeting now.
No, I'm just saying that commissioners gave their concerns to staff. Did anybody,
Like, who else came up with the same idea?
Yeah.
Tell you
Senate?
as we go through. We
Yeah.
tell you as we go through. So the turf and Centennial.
you don't have to say who, I'm just saying, were there standout items? Or the other way of asking this,
We got
Did-
input from 2 commissioners, so I can tell
Okay.
you the ones that we got
It's-
2 on.
and did the commissioners who got this, are they happy with this? I guess what I'm saying is, do we have to go through all these, or do the commissioners, is there one like 2 people cared about and they both don't like the answer? That's what I'm trying to say.
I think we identified where the overlap was, the landscaping and the playground, which we've already talked about.
So do any commissioners feel very strongly that we need to discuss any one of these in particular, or should we go down to number 23? If you like the answers, I guess is what have we not had time to read the answers?
The only,
You just got these answers.
Okay.
Yeah, it would have helped.
I
if
thought
we
so.
got an
I
answer.
was like, as soon as
yeah,
I got
yeah.
that.
And that's my whole point. I don't think, this is the first time I'm reading them, to be honest.
Right.
Yeah, I'd suggest that asking the question, and we could have gone down 3 more things. So let's,
Fine.
so let's,
Taking a break.
I think we got to slog through this. They're legitimate questions, and I haven't had a chance to read the answers. And to Commissioner Leach's point, that this is the one of a handful of things, 3 things that we have to do. So
What are the other 2?
I forget. Commissioner O'Brien told me years ago.
there's 3 things.
I have 3 things.
Keep your name out of the paper.
Yes.
It's great.
So,
So, are there objections to the regrade of the aquatic center turf?
no.
Okay. Indoor pool renovations at Centennial. This was planned as a result of the conditions analysis, which was conducted in 2017. Staff's feeling is that if we want to remove or postpone this, we should engage the board and our community in a discussion about the future of the indoor pool.
What is the objection to this?
The cost.
So what's the alternative?
So we actually brought it up in the last meeting, if you remember, and Terry probably could speak to it. And it goes back to a 2017 study, correct?
Yep.
And in that cost, it becomes quite expensive and my take, and I don't know if I'm right or wrong here, it seemed to be heavily reliant on going towards more of a UV option versus chlorine, which I grew up with a pool and I had no problem getting
It's not
light
UV.
and hair.
It's not UV versus chlorine.
Well, it's both, right? 'Cause
It's
you have to
UV
have both.
It's UV and chlorine. So
Right, it would be both.
Right.
Right. So in that regard, we're going to spend how many in the total project estimated? Once we get going. So this is like the first phase or second phase?
Second.
This is the second. So yeah, the overall cost of the project, all of the different phases, I think it was a little over $1 million, I believe.
So
And we
my-
spread it out over the course of 10 years at like 4 different
So in
points.
fairness to this is why I have a difference of opinion. I don't believe this is as critical as the community will not have an indoor pool. I just don't. So, but that's fine. I'm not saying the consultants or other people aren't right. I just think it's a lot of money when you add up $1 million for that pool.
Yeah.
And I know Commissioner Coyne loves that center, so I'm sure he's all for spending $1 million there.
She brought my name up. Be all for it if we had a better pool. I mean, it was underbuilt facility to begin with, and I don't know if we want to really get off on the sidebar of
we
this.
don't.
Forward
We don't.
thinking.
But
Forward
but
thinking.
so my question is, I'm torn because I think that certain renovations need to be done and upgrades need to be done. On the other hand, I think that we have an inadequate indoor pool facility, and we'll have an inadequate indoor pool facility when those things are done. So
Agreed.
my question is, do we spend? And so I actually, to the answer, I think is actually dead on. Is if we want to postpone this, and then maybe we should be engaging the community in a discussion about what we want as an indoor water facility, because I think, frankly, I just think it's inadequate for the needs of the community, or at least the wants of the community as it stands, and it would remain so if we fixed it. So it's sort of a good money after bad.
But so what's the alternative? To not have a pool?
What? No, the alternative is to well, until we can build a pool that actually has more than, how many lanes have we got there? 3? 4?
4.
There's 4.
There's 4.
Four.
It's what size is it related to Olympic? Is it half Olympic or is it?
It's 25 yards.
Yeah, it's 25 yards. So it's not a meter pool.
No.
It's shallow. I know it's not meant to be.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that when
What's the alternative? Are you going to expand the facility?
yes.
Yeah. With what money? With
Well, I'm not. I'm looking down the road and saying, if you want to have an indoor pool facility that is more adequate and more in keeping with what then we have to go and vote on that. And and the question really is in my head: do we spend that money on this with the idea that we wouldn't be doing any kind of new facility for indoor water until 2030, okay, and if we're going to, and that's what sort of the long-term plan is, or are we going to do something and say, well, after we finish the Oakton project and a couple other things, we're going to have to talk about the Centennial Fitness Center and the pool that's related to it, the Schumacher Natatorium, I believe.
discussion that says we have a long-term strategy of improving the.
Well, you just heard me bring it up because it's never really come up in a conversation before since I've been on the board. But I can tell you as a person that uses the pool facility and as I have family members that are swimmers, swam at Maine South and everything else, that pool doesn't do what it could do. And it was underbuilt. That whole building was underbuilt to begin with. And we're stuck with that. But we're not going to be stuck with it forever. Now, I think we're getting way kind of off the topic.
To share some insight, I think that prior to you coming on the board, that the previous board in its entirety, as we were all looking at Oakton and what types of amenities the district had gaps in or needed to, pulled a lot of that information. And indoor pool was one of those priorities. that fell on that list, certainly. And I think as we were looking at Oakton, the board decided that pool fell below some of the other priorities that ultimately ended up in our Oakton master plan. And I think at that time, when we were presented with the centennial indoor remediation, let's get some more life out of this pool. I think that was kind of board priorities at the time. Focus on Oakton and these things, and then extend the life of the pool. Not to say that this board doesn't have different priorities or that that's not a need or a gap, but just to shed some light on those discussions did take place.
And that's where we
No.
came up with that mess.
And it's fair enough, and there have been other pool facilities that where we deferred maintenance until the point where the pool couldn't be used anymore, and I don't, that's really not what I was getting at, Commissioner O'Donnell. What I when I said that, yeah, maybe we have to do without a pool, if I even applied that, my point is that it's a lot of money for an inadequate, what I believe to be an inadequate pool. Ultimately, that may be the best spend, and I'm not necessarily saying that I wouldn't even, that it should be cut from here, but I do question the throwing good money after bad, because I really do believe that facility is inadequate for the needs of the community.
Well, I want to I realize that we don't have an unlimited budget. Because yeah, I mean, it'd be fantastic if we could expand that facility, but that doesn't seem to be something that's going to be happening in the next few years. And I mean, one of our charges, I think, is to look out for not just the adult members of the community, but the littlest members of the community. And in terms of a place to take children during the winter, and in terms of a place for swimming lessons, and I think that it has some good things going for it. And yeah, I wish it'd be great if we could afford to do more, but I think we should take care of what we've got for now, because we don't have anything else concrete lined up. And I think it would be a shame to let it decrease. And I think that, I mean, there's definitely been parents who've complained about the condition of it. And I think if we could just at least improve it a little and make it a little nicer in there, and make the air quality in there a little nicer, I think that that would help, because it is something that can generate some revenue in terms of things like lessons, in terms of things that, it's a Saturday in February, your kids are making you nuts, and you pay for the family to go to the pool, right? Like, these are the kinds of things where it still serves a valuable purpose.
So, what's the consensus?
Well, I'm going to absolutely throw a fit if we don't leave this in. I don't see that we have an alternative. The alternative is to let it go the way the Oakton pool went, and then some years down the line, we won't have an indoor pool. We have not had any kind of a discussion about expanding that facility. I mean,
As intriguing as it would be to see you throw a fit, I want to.
all the items.
I want to state.
Let me say that this is the one that I feel the strongest about. Okay.
No, that's great. I think that I have. I asked some questions and raised some points. I have really no objection to pulling this out of the budget myself. So, just to be clear, I want to make, because I asked a question doesn't mean you shouldn't always interpret, where I'm headed on a particular issue, because I want some information about something that happened, 2 boards ago or a board ago, So just so you know, I'm not, if we're looking for consensus on this or consensus take it out, I would say leave it in based on the conversation we just had.
Good.
All right.
Well, I need a point of clarification then. So what is $280,000 getting us?
$280,000 is going to be added to the remaining budget that we had available for this year, and we would be putting on UV system for each of the 3 pool areas in there. So it'd be one for the spa, one for the leisure pool, and one for the lap pool. We've been looking to see how appropriate that number is, but that's the best accurate number we have for now. That includes UV system for each one of those pools, which should increase and will increase our air quality in that pool. So,
But this is not involving fixing like patching leaks or anything like that.
We don't have any right now.
So this is really not about maintaining in that regard. This is about upgrading the filtration system.
This is
Where it
about
started.
this is about maintaining and fixing the water quality that we have there.
So the pH levels are off.
No, pH is fine. Chlorine's fine. The chloramines are bad. So when a dirty person gets into the pool and their chlorine interacts with the um, the acids and stuff that are on the person, the ammonia, it combines and creates a chloramine. In outdoor pools, those chloramines have no problem gassing off and releasing. It can't do that in an indoor pool, and so that creates that chlorine-like smell. People think that's a clean pool. If you smell chlorine, it means it's not as clean of a pool as you'd like it to be. Those are regulated by the IDPH. Right now, 0.5 parts per million is what's allowable by law. We operate just under or at that level. That's the absolute best we can do, because the best way we can get rid of it is to either A, stop the chloramines from happening, make everyone shower, hose them down before they get in, or we have to evacuate the chloramines after they exist, or work with UV, which breaks that down. It also makes it a much safer pool if some young child goes in there and has like a cryptosporidia problem, diarrhea, whatever, that's left over in their swim diaper. So it definitely improves the safety. But there's a whole slew of different things. When that facility was built, I do not believe that 0.5 parts per million was the threshold. And so it might have been operating at a higher level, but that regulation has since been dropped, and we have to keep up with that. So that it has so many challenges. And what we do is we can reduce those chloramines by dumping the water and adding in fresh, except our heaters are woefully undersized there. And so when we dump the water, and especially in the winter and the water comes in cold, we can't heat it up fast enough for people to get back in the water the next day.
This has been an ongoing issue at that pool. It's not a new issue. It's just kind of been
Yeah.
dealt with.
And I mean, we have
To mention the water cost.
the rapidness of which I could speak to this is because we have done so much work to look at every angle. I have gotten it down to the minutes that people work at the hours of midnight to make sure they're backwashing, so that we can get the 10th of a degree best possible that we can at that facility to keep some of our swimmers happy. Yep. Yep. And chlorine's use also.
And not to beat a dead horse, but is this, and you may not know the answer to this, is this similar to the ventilation system that are problems that they had at the Main South pool a few years ago, or you're not familiar with that?
You know, I did speak with David Alm after the capital meeting. The board asked that I do specifically that, and I did speak. He's my counterpart at not District 60, 207, about their pools, and they have UV at all of them. He swears by it. He absolutely loves it. I don't know specifically what their issues were, but I know that this does exactly what it addresses. The air quality that you have, the air quality issues.
And they put in that UV. I'm quite sure they put in that UV system after this ventilation problem that they had.
Yeah, and
it was as a direct
right
solution for it. I'm not sure, but
and so one of the approach that we had originally looked at for this year was the idea of let's evacuate out the chloramines. Well, wait a minute. When the bids didn't come in right, it gave us a chance to kind of look a little more clearly at this, and we said, wait a minute. Why are we going to evacuate the problem? Why don't we fix the problem at its root? And so we may still need to, at some point, make some minor adjustments to how we ventilate that space just to continue to help it out. But nothing as drastic as what we were looking at, because we're going to address the problem a little differently.
And the lack of the ventilation problem that we have, it could cause, even at the levels that we're at, in certain maybe at-risk people, it can cause respiratory issues of some sort.
You know, there's a lot of articles you could read about the prolonged exposure of, chloramines that hover lower in levels and people refer to those things as, swimmer's lung or something like that.
Right,
So
I don't want to
sure.
I just want to compare.
So, do we have consensus on this?
Yes.
Thank you. Unless anyone has particular feelings on the northwest corner landscaping at the fitness center, I'm going to go with the prior landscaping direction. Great. The activity center movable wall, we had shown some pictures. A little additional context is that this budget covers the replacement of 2 movable walls, which are both past their useful life. one is currently inoperable, the other is very difficult to move. We talked about how it requires 2 staff members to move it and show the pictures.
Anybody have any issues with that?
The only thing I would say is for $45,000, it just doesn't seem to be a high priority to me, but you're the staff, it's your recommendation.
All right. Any other comment?
I'm going to lump the next two together. The copier replacements came up. They're past their useful life. Was there a particular point of discussion that we wanted to make about this?
So you said, when it says having to call for service often, is that something that then we're paying extra for?
We do have a service contract. I would need to check to see what that implication is. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Anybody have any objections leaving that in? All right.
The next is the network switch replacements. These I've provided an explanation here as to what a network switch is. If you're not aware, it allows all the facilities to talk to each other on the same network. The district's network includes 12 switches. Expected useful life is 4 years. The capital asset replacement plan reflects replacing 3 switches every 4 years. My only other additional comment, which we haven't talked about, is I could see that this could be an operating expense instead of a capital expense. It's just going to then reduce our operating surplus. So,
Any thoughts? No? All right. Move it on.
the golf ball picker. This is the one that was really kind of moving over from 19 to 20. I don't know if Terry wants to add anything or if anybody wants to raise what the particular issue was.
This one had a safety issue attached to it, didn't it?
No, the golf ball picker was one that we had budgeted for purchase in 2019, and the specific model was never identified by staff, and so the purchase wasn't made. So when we were going through the capital, I just put it in there just for discussion of what we would be purchasing next year. So it's still needed. It was needed this year. I think it's getting quite worn out, and the picker's not grabbing the ball the way it should or as effectively. So.
Any comment? No? Moving along.
The chemical sprayer. I'm going to hand this one to Terry to explain it again.
So we do have a sprayer now. It's pretty old. It doesn't have some of, like, the protective guards and things around the edges, and it's old and worn and leaky. We do not apply a lot of pesticides, and we don't have to use it very often. But this is something that when we do have the need to apply a pesticide, we want to make sure that we can do it in the most effective and efficient manner possible. So this is just replacing a piece of equipment that we use, although it is definitely dwindling in our need, but something we do still have a need for.
So this would be, it's kind of a safety issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just more about a target issue. If you want to make sure you're keeping the chemicals that you're applying in the location you want it to, you don't want the nozzles spraying and, having more pressure on one side and shooting off a little bit farther over here than it should and hitting some adjacent plants and things like that. So.
Any comment? No? Moving along.
The Hinckley Master Plan was suggested to reduce the planning amount to $50,000. This again, the planning is a function of the total project cost. So Terry can explain a little more about the rationale.
Yeah, so just as a reminder on this one, we had identified a number of projects that we would hope to accomplish with this project. The total of that was $1,115,000 and change. So the 150,000, the goal with that was, and I think it's a conservative number, but it's 15% of the overall project cost. We were intending to develop this project not only through the concept, but all the way through the construction document phase, so that we would have a shovel-ready grant eligible project. So, it's really the dollars just could become a function of what the value of the overall project is. So,
And we gotta spend those TIF dollars.
we do also have to spend the TIF dollars, but just in context, we did Northeast Park. That was a $375,000 playground. We spent 29,200, or about 8%. I can tell you that architect came back and asked us for more money, and Jennifer and I beat him back with a stick and said no, not this time. But he made a case for why he felt like he could have been. We were just able to defend against that, so we got off cheap on that one, just for a contextual. I think the 10 to 15% range is a good range generally. Obviously, the larger the project, you're going to see smaller percentages of the cost for architect fees and stuff.
Okay, the garage vehicles. Terry had identified and talked through our asset replacement plan for the garage vehicles. He added a little additional information that one of the trucks that is suggesting we could do without has 131,000 miles. The other one has 55,000 miles and has been incurring repair costs. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
No, I just, as a reminder, when we talked through the vehicles that, when we presented the capital, we had initially had 4 vehicles on the capital replacement list as we went into it, and we immediately took a look at that and reduced it by one of the dump trucks and deferred that to a future year, next year, I believe. We did identify still that we had a need for truck 8 and 15, which are the S10s. As I identified here, truck 8's got 131,000, so that's definitely probably the most we've ever put on a vehicle that I'm aware of, at least. And then 55 on truck 15 is really high up there. Truck 8, even just recently, the staff has been doing some work to try to mitigate some of the rusting out of the truck. It's like rusting away on us right now, and so we're trying to keep on top of that. And then truck 15 was one that was in a front-end collision last year that Paderma invested money in rebuilding, and it's just not been functioning well for us, and it's got a lot of miles on it for the vehicle that we use, so we're anticipating or would like to replace it. I will state that we are following up with Paderma because their decision was to repair this vehicle, and since it's still causing us some problems, we're going to see if there's any option there to help change how that particular vehicle comes out on this. But
The Main Park Nature Center pond improvements and aerators were identified for discussion. Just want to reiterate that we've seen improvements in the pond quality with the previous work that's been done on this area, and staff recommends continuing with this improvement program. Tree inventory update. So we provided some information based on some of the questions that were raised previously on this topic. So I don't know if you've all had a chance to look at that, or if there were any other thoughts or concerns about the tree inventory update.
Could we piggyback on the software that the city's using? You said it was tree something.
yeah, it's offered by Davy Resource Group. We might possibly be able to. We're looking at them for a quote, and then also looking to another company. So
Telling him to get on that.
Intergovernmental liaison.
Well, and we did say we would work with the city.
we'll look into it. So Davy's a whole different tree care company, so we're going to get proposals from them as well as from Graph Tree Care. We showed Graph what they had, and they said they can do the same thing. So it seems like it's something we can get from another.
What's that name?
Graph.
Graph?
That's who we used previously for inventories, but we're not beholden to them. We're getting a few different quotes. So
Question was raised, no new restrooms, picnic shelters, or walking bike paths despite the survey from residents. Top priorities, we see these things on the capital priority list here. We wanted to point out that Woodland Park has all three of those components, so that project is underway. The Hinckley plan would include pathways and a new shelter. We are expanding the shelter at the Nature Center. We continue to explore collaboration with the Forest Preserve for bike path connection to the Des Plaines River Trail. So we are actively working to address these priorities. Any commissioner thoughts?
Great.
All right. Okay. The next one would be a budget increase request to add a memorial bench for Commissioner Jim Janik, just beyond the center field fence at Kalina Field for people to sit and relax.
So if I can, this is one, is several of us served with Commissioner Janik. This is one that I added. I think it's something maybe going back 9 months, 12 months. Gail and I briefly discussed, and there was options. I think at the board level we might even discussed it. Either way, there was a lot of things that were thrown out as possible options by commissioners and or staff. This is one that I felt, given the timing since he's passed and the opportunity that we've found since, that his family really enjoys that park. It might be a nice tie-in with the family and with the board as a tribute to his service to the park district.
I think that sounds like a lovely idea. Any other commissioners? All right. Okay, so just to recap on the capital, what I'm hearing is that we will defer the main park playground project and add 25,000 for the nature playground and add 4,000 for the memorial bench. Okay, thank you. Lastly, make sure I'm following the agenda right here. There were some other recommendations from the commissioners that we heard from. One was to increase corporate sponsorships, which we always welcome and work toward. There's a little additional information that Margaret could speak to if you have additional questions, but from 2012 to 16, the district had hired a contracted employee to secure sponsorships. Net of hourly wages and commission, the sponsorship contract resulted in approximately $20,000 annually. In budget year 17, staff recommended that we would evaluate the manager of marketing and public relations, assuming those responsibilities, which she has done, and since then has been maintaining about $25,000 annually, which is higher than with the contracted employee. And she's always got great ideas and is continuing to work hard on bringing these revenues in. So, okay. Any other thoughts on that? There was a suggestion to increase the number of outdoor movie nights in the summer. And so April's provided some information about the movies and other family-oriented events that we offer. The currently offered 2 movies is an expense of approximately $2,000. That's $1,000 per movie. There's also potential loss involved because we have to hold the O'Connor building vacant in case of inclement weather. And that we've also increased offerings of other community events, such as the 3 family concerts at Prospect Park, the first and last Friday night concerts at Hodges, the relatively new Oktoberfest since 2017. We've added 2 concerts to South Park in 2018, and in this budget, it does include an additional family concert at Prospect Park.
I've always said I think you guys do a great job with that. So
Well done.
Okay, thank you. And then there's a suggestion to promote weekend grilling birthday parties in the authorized designated parks over 6 months as my understanding is we want to promote more grilling and and use of the parks for. Sorry, getting a little tired here, but yeah. So we have some data on the outdoor venue rentals. Fields and shelters have gone up from 10 in 2014 to 34 in 2019. So we feel like we have done a good job of promoting these. And staff feels that it might be challenging to offer field usage with a rental package, considering coordinating with affiliates. We weren't quite sure what the suggestion was with the field usage. Any other thoughts on these suggestions? Great. Well, we really do appreciate everyone's input, and we have tried our best to address all of the concerns and points raised. So thank you all for your input and direction. We've already discussed the tax levy, hooray. So now I would turn it back over to Commissioner Leduc for the motions. I would just point out that we will be amending this tentative budget and appropriation ordinance that is included in the packet to reflect the changes that we've discussed.
Well, it already says in tentative form, right? So that as amended.
I defer to the lawyers and and Marianne. Just say as amended, it can't hurt.
I move to adopt in tentative form as amended ordinance number 19-7, the combined annual budget and appropriation ordinance of the Park Ridge Park District and the Board of Park Commissioners of the Park Ridge Park District, Cook County, Illinois, for the fiscal year beginning January 1st, 2020 and ending December 31st, 2020.
Second.
All right, call it.
Any questions?
Oh, yeah. I'm like, call it. Like,
We discussed
that's
it
right. Any
enough.
further discussion?
Commissioner Coyne,
Aye.
Commissioner Grau,
No, nay.
Commissioner Leduc,
Aye.
Commissioner Leach,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnel,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington.
Yes.
All right. So now, as for the adoption of Truth and Taxation Resolution number 19-4, I move to adopt resolution number 19-4, a resolution determining the amounts of money exclusive of debt service and election costs estimated to be necessary to be raised by taxation pursuant to the proposed levy of the Park Ridge Park District for the levy year 2019. And I mean,
No, we gotta amend it.
yeah, so
Yeah.
as amended.
Second.
So just to clarify, we will amend it to reflect that reduction in the tax levy that we discussed earlier. I did include an explanation of the truth and taxation requirement in the memo and packet.
When do you need the taxation signed and all that? Because if we're going to have a new amended one, because I can't have them sign the one that I have tonight.
Mm-hmm.
So I might need to have the secretary and
If we could get it done by
President.
the end of the week, if they're available, is that doable?
It is.
Great.
is that all right? Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
They don't sign the budget appropriation ordinance, right?
Not the tentative form, no.
Yeah, that time should be fine.
All right, any commissioner comments? None? All right.
Commissioner Grau,
No.
Commissioner Leduc,
Yes.
Commissioner Leach,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnel,
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne,
Aye.
Commissioner Harrington.
Yes. That conclude the excruciating budget portion of our meeting tonight, and we have not run Dirk out of the building just yet. All right, so any new business from the board? Seeing none, I move to adjourn to closed session to discuss matters pertaining to appointment and review of attorney services requests for proposals at the Park District per 2C1 and to discuss land acquisitions per 2C5. We will reconvene to the special board meeting to take action on the selection of attorney services for the district. May I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Leduc,
Yes.
Commissioner Leach,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnel, Commissioner Coyne,
Aye.
Commissioner Grau,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington.
Yes. All right, we now reconvene the special board meeting on November 12th. It is 10:40. We are still here. We'd like to take action on the selection of attorney services for the district as was discussed in closed session. So I move to appoint the firm of Ansel Glink PC as corporate legal counsel effective January 1st, 2020, consistent with the terms of its proposal. To authorize the executive director to execute an engagement letter with Ansel Glink on such terms, and to recognize, commend, and thank attorney Tom Hoffman for his dedicated years of service to the Park District and to its residents. May I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, may we do a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Leduc,
Yes.
Commissioner Leach,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnel,
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne,
Aye.
Commissioner Grau,
I abstain.
Commissioner Harrington.
Yes. On that note, welcome. Welcome.
That was a doozy.
That was a doozy. Wait, we need to adjourn, right?
Hasty.
We do.
Welcome.
It's the most important document you guys pass. That's absolutely the case. So this is the way to learn the most about you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I look forward to it. I told Gail I'd come to the December meetings just in case.
They're usually pretty uneventful.
And now that I said that, it's not gonna happen, so I think we'll play that by ear and we'll be in touch. Does that sound good?
Good work.
Get a formally adopt a couple things.
Yeah.
Just in case.
He's worried.
Those are the weirdest things. One time, there was somebody in the audience and Mel explained to them why
I
the
haven't
window
adjourned yet.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. On that note, I move to adjourn the special meeting of the Board of Park Commissioners. Any opposed? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're adjourned.
We adjourn.